Welcome to the Hessian Scrum podcast. I am your host, Raphael, and for this very special entry, our guest is Mr. Danny Hyde from the bands Aural Rage, Electric Sewerage, and an ex-member of the legendary band Coil. Danny, thanks so much for accepting our invite and being here.
Thank you.
Also joining us from previous podcasts is Randal Plunkett, the 21st Baron of Dunsany, who's also a film director and an environmentalist. Randal, thank you so much for being here as well.
Always a pleasure.
And also joining us for the first time is Sam, great drummer from the band Sirrogha. Sam, thank you a lot for joining as well.
Thanks for having me.
All right, I'm pretty sure there are a lot of things for us to talk about here. As a starting point, one of the topics that we have been exploring on this podcast has been the connection between music and cinema. Now, I think Danny is very qualified to talk about this, given that with Coil you have worked on soundtracks. So can you give us some insights about the process and the difference between composing in that mode and composing for in a regular context?
You might be misinformed, because the only example I can think to do with Coil was the Derek Jarman movie.
That's exactly what I'm referring to.
Right. Well, that was with everything with Coil, including mixing 9 Inch Nails or whatever. It was total freedom. There was no brief. Mm-hmm. It was awesome. Here's a rough picture. I mean, the film Blue is just a blue screen, yeah. From what I've seen, it's just a blue screen with commentary. But the brief from oh God, I forget the director's name. The famous director. Who's the director of Blue?
Jarman.
Yeah, Jarman. Yeah, the brief was. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, this is the picture of the whole, what I'm trying to get at. Do what you want. And I think everybody wrote the piece, and it was up to him where he was going to insert the piece. There was no studio with timeline running and visuals on one screen, and we're composing to the visuals. It's almost like the music came before the film. And then I think Jarman decided which part of the film he was going to put the bit in. So I wouldn't feel qualified to comment on that process, having watched Hans Zimmer a million times on YouTube, So no, I mean, we were always given free. And there were a couple of times we did music for soundtracks. So let's say, what was that film? Young Americans, I think it was called. Not Young Americans. Americans. I wish I had Google on the side here. It was a film with Danny Cannon directed. Mm. And Harvey Keitel was in. I can't remember the bloody name of it. I went and saw it. It was not a brilliant movie. They just said, we want to use a piece. We want to use a remix you did of 9 Inch Nails, but we want it redone. We want it kind of faster. And we said, well, we can't, that's silly. We can't speed it up. And they said, yeah, but you have to remix it. And all we did is we repeated the same process we did from our notes from the original remix, with them sitting in the back of the room, shouting yeses and nos. But again, there was no visuals there. Although it was mixed to 5-1, it was mixed for surround sound. There was no running screen of the visuals. It would have helped if there was, because obviously we could have pushed things on certain bits to make it more, So again, I think that was left to the editor at their end. It was more a kind of, this is what we want, go for it, and we'll make it work. We didn't have the pleasure of sitting there, which would have been great. We would have finished edited intro, because the music was used at the intro, and we had running pictures. That would have been great for us, because of course we could have adjusted the tempo to fit their cuts and things like that. But we had none of that. We had none of that information. It was kind of like, do what you did before, but do it with us in the room. Because we want to be here when you do it. And we kind of did what we did on the original mix, just a 5-1 surround sound version, which is essentially just panning things off to different places, really. Mm-hmm. But that's about it with I'm afraid. It's a very small experience on that, I'm afraid.
But a very significant, I would say. I mean, it's a legendary director and a very idiosyncratic movie, to say the least.
Well, I tell you who was in the room at the time was David Arnold, who turned out to be a really big time composer. He was there with Danny Cannon, the director, and he was really nice. David, I'm not going to say anything about Danny Cannon, but David Arnold was a really nice guy, and we didn't realize the skill of his own compositions and what a musician he was or whatever. He just turned up as a really nice guy and didn't push any bullying things, just made a few little suggestions here or there. He was a really nice guy, you know. If I'd known he was the composer of the rest of the music for that film, we would have got him a lot more involved, you know, but we just thought he was a mate of the directors who had wandered in, as often happens, you know.
I see. Yeah, well, I also made this question because precisely because I was wondering about the process, because I mean, it's a very unique, as you were, it must have been a very unique experience, given that even if you were actually in the room, I mean, the movie is the only image is literally the blue screen, and so I was really wondering if there were any type of instructions or if you guys knew that the type of the dialogue that you were going to score or anything like that. But
you're talking about the Jarman film now, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, most of it comes from Pete. Pete always had the connection. Someone would approach Pete. Mm-hmm. Pete would say, "Do you fancy doing this?" And of course, I'd say, "Yeah," because he was probably one of the greatest guys I ever worked with in terms of, you know, positivity. Mm-hmm. I just remember that strange conversations of an abstract wasteland world, etc., etc. Some hints on at the time HIV was a big, you know, was big news. There was some. It was kind of towards that. It was towards, you know, how you feel about your life when you come to the end. It was just kind of abstract concepts, and I didn't know it was just going to be a blue screen. I had no idea, you know, it was going to be just a blue screen with Jarman speaking or various speakers on the film or whatever. So it was a very abstract thing. And, you know, we went in there. It was done so fast. God, we did it in about 2 hours or something. But we'd gone to this really cheap studio in Brixton in London and nothing worked. But having worked in studios myself, you don't want to get aggressive with the staff because you're really under pressure when you work in a studio where things don't work and every client comes in and they moan, and you try and keep them happy. So instead of moaning at them, we kind of, if a fader didn't work, we just used another fader. You know, if something there didn't work, we just went another way around it. They were the only problems we really had, but the whole thing was done in a couple of hours. I mean, it was a very simple little thing. Having said that, most of the things we ended up in the studio with had already been slightly pre-prepared at home. You know, I don't think we ever went into a remix, except the Depeche Mode mix where I was in Spain and I had to come back for it with no time to pre-prepare. But everything else, we normally had rough cuts at home of a million projects, and we go, "Oh, well, what about this one? This kind of sounds like what you're talking about," and then, you know, you pull it up, and then, yeah, let's work that on that one. You know, it was kind of like something that was almost pre-written that you had somewhere. You know, those things you abandon. Everyone has them. You're doing something and you lose interest or it's not going anywhere, and you just kind of make a copy of it and move on, you know. But that's what I remember of that, of Blue. In fact, I've got a copy of the DVD, and it might be time to finally watch it. What are we, nearly 30 years later? Or maybe we are 30 years later. Yeah, I think it was 1993. So yeah, 30 years later, maybe I should watch it from beginning to end. I did happen to catch the end credits, and I was really pleased to see that alphabetically, because my name is Danny with a D, Eno followed me. I was really pleased with that. As the credits rolled out, that's one thing. So I obviously saw the end credits somewhere. But yeah, it's a very, very, very small memory because it was a very small project. It was, you know, it was in, out, done. We never did go back to that studio in Brixton, you know, for obvious reasons. But it was that's what I remember of that. It was tough. Lucky it wasn't a more complicated piece. Otherwise, we would have struggled.
So, Sam, you had a question, so go ahead.
Yeah, whether my question was, you know, working on the soundtracks or just generally with Coil. I know you mentioned that everyone just had complete freedom, and I wondered, was that ever a problem? Did creative conflicts ever develop? You know, you have some really strong artistic personalities within the group, and did you ever like clash over which direction you wanted to go in a song or what you wanted to do, or was it pretty diplomatic? Did you have a process for working around that? How did that sort of thing work?
Well, I tell you, the God's honest truth is, with Pete and Jeff, I mean, John is, to me, is Jeff, John Balance. I was always 100%, well, no, 110% doesn't even exist. So I'll say 100% aware that it was their band. I was always aware of that band. I've always said, when people have said, you were part of Coil, I said, no. Coil was Pete and Jeff. Everybody else came along, but it was those guys. So I never got involved in, no, the song should do this or the song should do that. I just fire away my ideas with keyboards or whatever, and it seemed that they would accept them the way they were. But if something was said, no, we don't like that, I'd just dump it. I wouldn't push it because it was their band. I mean, it was 100% their band. To me, it was a fun project because, let's say 1990, I was doing a lot of remixes for lots and lots of other bands with other people. And some of those jobs could be really miserable because you could have A&R in there, coked out of their nuts. And, you know, you could have artists with too much ego because they'd had one hit. And the whole process could be really, really stressed. With Coil, it never was. You know, it never was stressed. And I was so aware it was their band. I didn't, you know, I might suggest something. But if Pete or Jeff had strong feelings that they wanted to go a certain way, I never considered it had any right or place to say, no, you shouldn't do that. You should do this. Unless let's say it was the remixes. With remixes, because that's what I was doing so much of, they just let me get on with it. So I just get on with it, and they might go away and then come back later in the day and go, yeah, it's great, let's go. And so there was never a conflict in those. You know, when I'm talking about remixes, I'm talking about the other bands. But with Coil, I mean, Jeff could have said to me, look, I want you to mic me up on the toilet while I'm having a shit. And as I pull the toilet paper, I want you to put that in time with the drum track. And I would have done it because, you know what I mean? It's his band. And I love the fact that with these guys, we can do all kinds of stuff. But I was always aware it was their band, you know? And I mean, sometimes in the early days, Jeff singing, by the time we got to New Orleans, Jeff singing to me had really improved. He'd done a lot of lessons, and to me, I could really hear now it was starting to have power and not sound like a stroppy student having a tantrum, let's say, or whatever. But in the very early days, when I first was working with them, I would sit there and I would think, you're so dreadfully out of tune. But I thought, you know what? That's too academic. That's too like what we do with any other session. If they like that take, we're going with that take. You know, far be it from me to say blah 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 blah. Don't forget this is before autotune and Melodyne and all these things. And sampling was a real sampling. You'd sample and you had to do mathematical calculations to work out, you know, to keep it in the same key and get it in a new tempo. It isn't like it is now where it's piss easy. You just stretch it out and away it goes. So let's say certain samples you might have taken really a long hours or an hour on to get in tune with a track and in time with a track. But if they then turn around and said, no, just not into it, you just drop it. You know, you wouldn't get defensive about it because they gave you so much freedom normally, and it was such their band and their vision that me as an outsider, and I think Drew did the similar thing, we never questioned where they were going with something. It was up to them. Now, whether they argued themselves when they were at home, who knows? Who knows? But in the studio, it was really pleasant. There was never some of the fighting I saw with other bands, you know, where people lost it and it was fisticuffs and stuff. There was none of that. It was, I don't know, it was just some of the easiest sessions you could ever do in terms of enjoyment. You didn't notice the clock. You never looked at the clock. The only time you looked at the clock is if you're panicking that you're running out of time. You never looked at the clock to think, oh God, when's this going to finish? Like you might do if you were doing a linguaphone CD for the English language, or you're doing an advert for butter or something, you know, which a lot of us did in the early days. So that's my thing on that. Yeah, it was as free as it's get. gets. I must have worked with thousands of people in my time, and I've never seen sessions that were so free and unstressed. You know, it's like it didn't matter if it suddenly changed key and it suddenly sped up and everybody liked it. Well, that was the way it was. But obviously, when in the early days when John was singing, he wasn't so in control of his voice. You'd have to cater to his voice more, you know. If something was too fast and he couldn't sing at that speed, obviously you'd slow it down, etc., etc. You know, so he was driving things in that respect. But later on, when it became more abstract, I think you know, it was just let's make it work, whatever happens, you know. It was.
So John did have some vocal training, you said, right?
He definitely did. Well, he admitted it. When we went, when he went to New Orleans and you put the microphone. Funny enough, Marilyn Manson had just finished their first album with Trent there, and Trent mentioned that of all the microphones, Marilyn wanted this one particular one, this S7, I think it was called, and it was not a brilliant sound, you know, compared to an AKG 414 or U87 Neumann or something. But so Jeff said, no, I'm going to have a go. I want that. If he wanted it, I'm going to try it, you know. And as soon as he sung in New Orleans, you could just tell he had more control, you know. And so we had that conversation, you know, not what's changed. How the hell can you suddenly sing? It was like, you know, you seem to be singing differently. And then he said he'd been doing lessons, you know, to teach him about the breathing and the the whatever. But I just wish you know, it wasn't many years after that he died, and obviously there was the alcohol problems and that everyone knows about. But that particular time, yeah, he was getting control of the voice. So it's hard to explain. It's like, you know, if you put a microphone in front of somebody and they're singing like I don't know, let's say they're a protest song, someone can do it really powerfully. And they're using the same lyrics, and someone else can just make it sound like they're having a tantrum. I don't know that, you know, I'm not a singer, but something happened to Jeff where, to me, maybe it got more conventional in a way, but suddenly he was hitting the notes. Like, let's say the song A Cold Cell, if we'd done that in 1990, I don't think it would have had the power, you know, from his voice. It's a different voice, you know. So yes, he admitted to having lessons. I think that's out there. I'm not telling tales out of school, so to speak. I think that's been mentioned before. But again, Jeff would do a vocal, and Pete would never say, no, that was out of tune or this or that. It would be like, let's do another take. Maybe it was his diplomatic way. You know, we'd just do a bunch of takes and then somehow we'd compile or pick the best, you know. But there was never a, no, that's wrong, you know, what are you doing, blah, blah. You know, it was, things were accepted. And maybe it was that freedom that allowed everybody else to relax and do their best. As you'll probably know, you all do your best when you're relaxed. When you're under stress, let's say you go for an interview and you're really stressed, you're not as good as you would have been if you just met the person casually somewhere, you know. And so that's what made the sessions fun, was the freedom.
Sounds incredible. I guess that has a lot to do with how good the music ended up turning out.
I think it also has so much to do with Pete's confidence as well. Pete he was just such a lovely person to work with, because he made you feel important. You know, everybody. It was the T-boy wouldn't get told. You know, it wouldn't be like the T-boy would get told off because he didn't bring the tea warm enough. There was none of that. There was never any. You know, I'm paying good money, and sometimes Coil were paying their own money for the studio. You know, it was money Peter had earned that was paying for everything, but it would never, you know, give anybody a hard time if they were maybe a bit late, or if they were a bit hungover, or if the T-boy had forgotten the order or something. There was never any tantrums, you know, and it just made it nice for everybody. Even when we got musicians in from outside, like I remember they met some guy, some busker at an underground station somewhere, and they invited him down to play some stuff, you know, and it didn't work out. He obviously didn't know where we were coming from, let's say, but we found bits that worked, you know, and but in the end, he was relaxed. He wanted to hang around, you know. I mean, that's unusual, you know. Normally, a guy would just like give me my dough and I'm off. Goodbye, you know. I think that happened many times when we were in Matrix, which had 3 studios. Guys from other studios would come into our sessions and just hang around all day, like Mike McAvoy ending up playing the keyboards on the snow, you know. He just said, "Oh, I like this. Give us a go on the keyboards," and away jazz, you know, a little jazz, you know. It was just a lovely place to be. Lovely place to be.
So you said that. That's another thing that I always wondered is the financial solvency. You know, because it doesn't seem like, you know, really commercial music. So I was wondering, you know, how was it paid for? And you said, you know, it's from Peter's income, from his.
It was up to Horse Rotorvator might be different because Steve-O has always got a claim on that.
Right.
But certainly later on, I think they got so pissed off with the way Horse Rotorvator the deal went that later on Pete pretty much covered it. I mean, he was earning quite a bit from those videos in the days when, you know, rock videos,
right?
Whoever. I remember hearing on a conversation, who was the band? It will come to me. It was a big heavy metal band, and I remember hearing Pete say, "Yeah, 180K, that will do it. That will sort it." So the budgets were, you know, the money was reasonable, you know, in those days in the video rock MTV style world, and I think with that money, Pete covered everything. Yeah, it was, which might have helped, might explain why the sessions were so nice, because we didn't have record company popping in every 5 minutes going, "Oh, you know, oh, is there a single on here?" and etc. etc. You know, oh, which is the first? How's the album doing? Blah 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 blah. Pressure. There was none of that. So yeah, Pete was throwing his money in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I certainly never put an invoice into anybody else. You know, and yeah, we missed out on things when World Serpent went under. They owed us quite a bit of money, but us being Coil and me, but most times they were self-released. Yeah. So.
Okay, and going back to, now that we're talking about Coil and going back to the whole soundtrack thing, I brought that up because I also think, not sure if you'll agree, or if any of you will agree, but I think that in my opinion, at least, or in my experience, I've always felt that the music of Coil was, in a sense, very visual, you know? In fact, many times I almost feel like Coil's albums are like soundtracks to movies that were never made. So I like to, for example, music to play in the dark, or even I think every album to me sort of sounds like that sometimes. And so I was really curious to know if in your experience as a composer and producer, if you when you were creating in this total freedom regime, if you ever felt something similar to this, as if you were scoring your inner visions or something like that.
I'm afraid to say that visuals now, as you know, people will take a picture of their breakfast. I mean, everything's a visual now. And I regret that we couldn't film. You know, we didn't have that opportunity then to film, let's say, when we were making Love Secret Domain, because it would have made a hilarious documentary. You know, but sound was what was important to us then. It was like the vision didn't come into it. Do you see what I mean? There might be an internal dialogue within each of us, had our own internal dialogue going on about what we felt a piece meant. But I don't ever, personally, it was never about vision to go with it. You got to remember then the only video editing was something like Avid, you know, tens of thousands of pounds, you know. So you didn't consider getting some video editing stuff yourself, let's say, and scoring to it in the early days there. So no, it was music of itself. You know, we just discovered Walkmans had just come out and things like that. This is before MP3 players, a lot of this stuff, you know, and just being able to walk down the beach and hear the mixes you'd done. That was great. That was your vision. Your vision was what you were seeing with your eyes, you know. But I don't ever remember scoring a piece and thinking, do you know what? Looking back, it's a real shame, because I would agree with you. I keep waiting for some director somewhere to pick up a Coil album. Something like Horse Rotorvator would fit in great in bits of an album, in bits of a film, There was the Hellraiser thing, obviously, where I worked with them with that. That was when I first met them, actually, with their little toy pianos and everything. And I thought, I like these guys. They're completely bonkers. We worked over some nights, and I wasn't aware that was actually going to be for Hellraiser, because Clive Barker was a friend of theirs or whatever, and it didn't turn out, as you know. He went with somebody else, but that was the only project, looking back, that was written, unbeknownst to me. I weren't aware of it at the time, unfortunately, but was being written for a piece of movie, let's say. No, that luxury. It's just a different age now. It's hard to imagine. It's like trying to explain to some young guy, when you're trying to explain what it was like when you used to travel with no internet and with things like traveler's checks. It's that far away. It's now how we can make brilliant videos with Vegas editing or whatever editing software you use and visual images, and you can consider scoring to that. Then it was almost like they were two worlds apart. We're music people, and we want to play the piece, and we always darken the room. Don't get me wrong. You'd always, when you play the final mix, would dim the lights right down to nothing, and put them on the best speakers in the studio, and lose yourself in the thought. But it was always about the sound. It was always about the sound of things. I don't know. Maybe Pete was, being a video director, but I was never sitting there thinking, wouldn't it be great if we scored with we had bits and all this stuff. And also, it wasn't until later on that they got into doing the live show thing. Maybe if they got into doing live show a lot earlier, we could have then started considering writing pieces to go with backdrops for shows and things, if you see what I mean. Sure. For me, I don't know for John, for Jeff, I don't know what his thoughts were, or Pete's, but for me, it was just about the piece had to stand in itself. Then later on, pieces got picked up and used. I mean, I seem to remember one, The Hills Are Alive, ended up in a show in the UK called White Teeth. Is it White Teeth? It's from a famous book, and that ended up in that. They just, all of a sudden you get the PRS, you get a little PRS amount of money come to you, and you go, what the hell is this? And you look it up, and it turns up it was in some TV show that someone had picked it up separately. It's not been written for the show. I don't know how they would do films. Maybe they have a guy that goes and scouts locations, and they have a guy who goes and scouts music. But someone had obviously found this piece and decided to put it in this particular show, So yeah, I'm a dunce on that side of things, I'm afraid. It may be, and I'm too old now to learn to care.
Actually, I was referring more to that process of not exactly scoring something that already exists, like any random image or a movie, but more like during the process of when you come up with a melody or any sound. If there's because some composers do work like that. They have and maybe Peter, because he was more of a visual minded guy, as you were saying. I imagine that maybe he sort of worked like that in the sense of having the music, so to speak, manifesting inside his mind as a sort of a semi-visual thing. It's just it happened to be expressed as music. I'm not sure. Just a guess.
I know what you're saying. Listen, you are talking to a man who has tripped on LSD, so I can cross I can cross the borders of whatever. But I can't speak for Pete. Unfortunately, we never had those conversations. But from my point of view, I don't know. Something. It's like an emotion. It's like let's say you eat a fantastic meal, and it's very simple. And 15 guys could have cooked that meal, but one particular, what's happened here?
I think
he's recharging, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't hear it.
Can keep talking.
Well, the point I was going to make is some meals just hit a note with you, and you just feel satisfied in a way, and and another meal just fills your guts. So you know you got some petrol in your tank. Well, it's like that with the music. You can't, and I'm sure it happens with all musicians. But sometimes something just works, and you can't overanalyze why it works. It just works, and it makes you feel something, and it makes you feel something, and something else you could have worked really hard on, and when you play it back, it makes you feel nothing. But you still don't know what the bits are that do it. All you know is that sometimes the harder you work on something, the less you feel to it afterwards. It's sometimes the things where you don't overthink them and you just go with the flow, that when you listen back later are the ones that just, maybe it's the simplicity of it or something. You just listen back later and you just feel some power, but it's hard to explain. It's almost like there's not words for it. You know, it's too easy for me to say words. I could say colors. You know, this is blue, this is red, whatever. But we have to be speaking from the same color tone. You know, to understand what I meant by red and blue and green and etc. But a big studio was a wonderful place. I mean, don't get me wrong. Now it's fantastic. I have a little studio in another room there, and I can make some great sounds, which maybe could compare to what we got in the big studio. But the big studio had one thing I miss, which was we could be a team in there. There could be various people in there. You know, it was a room. It was they're coming together. You know, and in the room, and all the way someone might be up, someone might be down. It's those different feelings mixing in. That I miss. It's a lot more white coats and microscopes now. You know, you can do something and you can go away for a couple of days and come back to it, which is normally the sensible thing to do. And I'm not saying you won't get it perfect, but it might not go into a place where you didn't expect. It will almost go to a place you expected because it's so controlled. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. No. But in terms, I do know Jeff started seeing the stories when we were doing Love Secret Domain, that Jeff did start seeing Roman legions and things passing through the room at the time, you know, that he kind of hinted at. But we've been up for many, many days on various things which I won't mention, which keep people up for various days, but mainly because we had to get done in a week, because that's all that could be paid for that studio. So you book lockout, which means no one else can come in, but at the end of your lockout period, you're gone. So you have to get your album mixed. So you do long hours. But Jeff certainly, he didn't take any LSD or anything, but he certainly went off into some trippy space for a short while, you know. And then there was hilarious laughing just took place where just belly laughing, like, you know, I miss that kind of laughing. It's kind of laughing that you might get if you're really stoned, but it was not stoned. It was just from, I don't know, release of pressure, and we just were all laughing our heads off over something ridiculous that happens in the soundtrack at the time, you know. So I don't know how Pete was seeing things. I don't know how Pete might. I mean, he never showed it, but he might have been sitting there thinking, "My God, I've just spent the last of our mortgage money on this. It better work." I don't know. He never showed that. Jeff was more imaginative in terms of, I'm sure sometimes he was having a really hard time in the studio. You know, you could see it in his face. You know, again, he didn't voice it to kill this. He wouldn't, you know, kill the session. He'd wander off into his own little space somewhere. I forgot what I was saying, but I think you get the drift of what.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, this comes down to personal experience, I guess. And like you were saying, we'll never know how, these mysterious zones where Peter and Jeff were traveling, or whether visual or audio or a mix of both or whatever.
All I can say is, having worked with, I'd say I must have worked with, it must be at least 1,000 different people in the studio over all the years. It must be. But all I can say is those sessions were unique. The core sessions were unique. Lots of other sessions followed very, obviously, because budget restrictions and, egos and whatever, they seem to follow a more set pattern. like, no, we didn't rehearse it like that. It was rehearsed like this. You know, they followed their set patterns. With Coil, you never knew. When you arrived in the studio, you didn't know what was going to happen. You didn't even know. I mean, don't forget, certain tracks you might have started 3 years before. And then Pete might suddenly mention, oh, you remember that thing we did, the Smelly Tongues or whatever it was called, you know, on that multi-track at that studio, you know, years ago. Oh, why don't we have a go at that again, you know? And so that would come rolling out. And so from what you thought you were going to do that day, you suddenly dived off somewhere completely different into a different space, you know, and time. Mm-hmm. So by 2000, I won't go into. I split with Coil. I didn't split with Coil. I split with the music business for a couple of years, and I went back to see them in 2002. And by then, the tech had moved on considerably, you know. And they were based in Weston-super-Mare, and they had this. They had a home studio now, but tech had moved on so much that you know, you know the way that it works. Happy accidents are more created by messing with the machines, as opposed to like Joe Blogg or Drew or me or Pete or John that's done something that's got everyone else's attention, and then we worked on that little thing. You know, it was more the machine would produce something odd, and then you'd grab hold of it. You know, it was almost like the machine was starting to because it was very exciting times after all the years where we'd struggled with early samplers and sequencers and live playing. Suddenly when things like Ableton Live came on, and you know, it was like, my God, these things can do what? You know, it was still mind-boggling. So you're getting caught up in machines, you know. And if they'd lived another 20 years, I would have loved to have seen where that had gone, you know. I would love to see it.
Right, so before we move on to other stuff, you know, Randal, on this topic, you are a film director and you're very, very involved with sound. Before we started recording, you said that Coil was your writing music. So I think it would be interesting to get your part of this, how you experience Coil, this whole being about the visual and the sound, or maybe I'm not sure if you'd be interested in one day in having Coil as a soundtrack to some Coil songs in a movie of yours, or even directing one of those movies that we were speculating about, those movies that would be Coil albums.
I think it's very interesting, right? Because I heard Coil, and I think it was in college. I think I must have been about 18, 19. And I was a slacker, smoked a lot of weed, you know, hung around parks. I was living in Oxford at the time. And the thing is, I was studying film, and the thing is I grew up on surrealist cinema. So, you know, I watched Blue. You know, these were the things I watched. You know, while everybody else was, you know, going to football, I was sitting there watching obscure movies and David Lynch films and stuff. So when I heard Coil for the first time, I remember that I didn't know what to make it. I was a metalhead, so I was kind of like, it's not metal, but it's not sort of techno music either. It's not this. It's not. It was sort of unidentifiable. But what I thought was very interesting about it, and what really got me, is that there was very abstract and it had something that was unique. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it just seemed to stimulate my visual side. So it was interesting. So I wrote a lot of things, always listening to things like Coil, because obviously every album has its own unique style, and everything is quite different. And it was the 2000s, so it was still we were still kind of not, like, media wasn't so accessible. It was beginning to get, you know, the DV industry was started, so there were cameras that could record digital. So you were beginning to have the ability to have access to things. DVDs were now available. You know, before it was like VHS. In fact, my copy of Blue is on VHS. You know, that just tells you where I'm at in the world. But it was like having access to this stuff and then suddenly hearing it. In fact, I don't even know if my copy of Music to Play in the Dark was even authentic. I'm pretty sure it was probably from Russia. I'm not even sure it was an authentic copy. And the thing is like, but it was such a different thing because it was all the greats, all the people I was fascinated by, all the people whose journeys I wanted to simulate for myself creatively. It almost felt like that music was it, because it wasn't, you weren't going to listen to that in the car humming away. It wasn't going to be on top of the pops, but it was this underground, this obscure music that was full of emotions. And obviously, where I was at the time, which was a Stone student, helped a lot with my understanding of certain themes and tones. But a lot of what I got from it, I later realizing, obviously I'm a much older person now, but a lot of what was there is the sound, the sonic signatures, the sparseness of the music is very much about an emotion. It creates an emotion when listening to it. And I mean, Danny, I don't know what's like when you're making that kind of thing, because maybe you're, to create it, you have to be a little bit disconnected from it. I'm not sure if that's how it is. Maybe you can tell me. But for me, when I create something, I have sometimes I'm not sure what I'm going to create yet. I have a feel, I have a tone, and I try and harness that tone by getting something. Now it can be visual. So sometimes it's painting, sometimes it's music, sometimes it's a sound, it's a frequency. And from that, I start to add layers to it. So that frequency makes me think of this. So I make connections. Then I take a piece of something that's perhaps, let's say, an image, and I start to put images together. And sometimes they're like just reference images, photography, broken buildings, anything. And I start to piece these things together. And what I found when I heard these things is that I was beginning to visualize real scenarios. And because of the sparseness of it, because particularly some of the later stuff where there was a lot more vocal content on it, it was just eerie. So and because I was fascinated by horror, it had an almost horrific element to it, but without, being the Halloween soundtrack, which was on the nose. It was very haunting. And that kind of stuff is how I began to abstractly put things together. Now, I come from a long line of people who are quite creative. Like my great grandfather was a fantasy writer, so maybe that part of the brain is just more, should we say, seasoned than the average Joe. But that sort of concept of how I put things together, that was a very good catalyst for me. And that's why music, a lot of what I do starts with sound. And creating sounds, I like collecting sounds as well. It became a big thing where I would make little recordings. Even on my last film, we recorded a lot of sounds. We would go around recording sounds. A lot of it never got used, don't get me wrong, but I just love the idea of metal scraping across metal and finding different textures. Now, nowadays, the modern sound guys have it easy. They can go to a library and they can throw a few filters over it. But back, when I started, I still to this day don't quite know how to do all that. So I'm still sitting there with my recorder on and I record things. And that's what we did with The Green Sea, which was my last movie. It started from that basis. And we built an entire soundscape. Like, it was a drama, but it had more than 81 layers of sound in it. And that was myself and the sound guy. And the sound people normally, at least the sound designers, they don't normally sit in with the director. That's not a normal thing. I was there every single day for that movie in the sound studio because I wanted to know everything from getting rid of the bumps to putting in the room tone. I needed to see everything because it was very much, it's like when you have a vision, and this is Danny, this was a question I have for you. How much of what you do you have a vision of, and how much of it is just you throw in things and it just starts to amalgamate into something? Because for me, there was a very much a vision, and that vision, it just built. Obviously, what I get at the end is always going to be different, but it's very clear to me from a very early stage what I'm trying to build towards.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, you've got. I mean, it's possibly different with a film because you've got to have an end. You've got to have something that stands together for a long period of time. From beginning. I don't know how long your films are, but I assume they're longer than, let's say, 6 minutes or something. With a piece, you maybe to a degree you're kind of free because you can just go wherever it takes you, and and it's only 6 minutes of someone's life. If you're not, there's not too much pressure to to try and get everything in there. Do you see what I mean? And me personally, I never woke up and said, I want to do a really dark tune today. Do you know what? It's just occurring to me now, listening to you, different approach. I'm not saying my approach is right. And I'm starting to think maybe my approach was wrong, but my approach always came from the same place. Tinker about with something, a bit like maybe I always use cooking as an analogy, you know, like you mix a few spices and you don't know why, and they're fantastic, but you put a little bit more of something else and it just blands the whole thing out. And where's it gone? Where's that unique flavor gone? You know, so it's being a non-musician, you know, as opposed to, I've worked with some really, really good musicians, like some superb musicians. I'd never call myself a musician. So I was always a backroom person. I always wanted to be, you know, in the back. But I start, you know, I tinker around with things and I'd go where they take me. I didn't have a pre-planned vision of where we were going to go. I either liked it and it connected with me, or it didn't. And that might have been a mistake. Maybe this is why. Let's say if we'd had a record company involved in any of the things we ever did, and I'm including myself in that, they'll be like, no, this album doesn't work. There's a jazz tune there. There's this tune there. It's got to be, you know, it's got to be all this flavor. So no, I've never had that. And maybe my feelings are not strong enough. Maybe I should go. I haven't been in the studio now for 4 years. I must admit, I keep thinking, when the 4-year period comes, you think, right, I've got to start doing something. But as you know, if you don't feel it in your guts to really want to do it, you don't force yourself in there. If you don't need to, you know, if it's not needed to pay the rent, if it's now just your love, do it when you really want to do it, because then you'll be in there and you'll be having the time of your life because you want to be in there, you know. But maybe with the next album, I'll try that approach. I'll say, this is terror. This just has to be terror. Everything has to scare the shit out of me, and start with the idea first, and then go looking for the things that point in that direction. But I've, up to this point, never been in that situation. Not with Coil, was never, and my own stuff never. But obviously with remixes for record companies, you know, big, you know, Warner Brothers or whoever, Universal or whoever, there was always the A&R man telling you what they wanted. We want this to be a dance stomper. We want this to be a, you know, you had your direct, you knew where you were going, you knew the flavor, and so you had a direction. But with personal things, no, it's always been, that 5 minutes when you just tinker with something and you're thinking about something else, you're thinking, bloody hell, you know, that girlfriend, she really screwed me over, or whatever, or why doesn't my son phone me anymore, or whatever's going through your mind. And you tinker with something and you say, I really like this. I'm going to record this. This is really good. You know, but you work from that, from whatever it was that's connected with you. I had a question for Randal, actually, but
go ahead, man.
Yeah, it was, I would like your opinion. Don't worry, I'm not going to pin you down to this, but I'd like to send you a link to my video channel, because I'd like your opinion as a visual person, because I seem to have gone about things the wrong way. Not the wrong way. It's my way, in that the music comes first, and then I go looking for images to match the music, as opposed to having a bunch of images and then write music for those images, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And I love my videos. I absolutely love them. But I've got to be honest, they have, like, when you worked quite hard and you look at it after 4 years and only 300 people have seen it, you get depressed. I'd like your opinion. I'd like your honest opinion how I should change them. Because to me, because like the days of sampling, not being a visual person, not being a video editor type person, I approached it in the same way I always approached music, from a sampling point of view. You know, I take bits I like and I mix them all together, you know, in a nice hodgepodge. And maybe it's just too complicated. I don't know, but I would love some feedback on it.
I would be delighted, but I would also say, like, the thing is that we have to understand there's a difference between success and creation, because I mean, you know, I've listened to your catalog, like all aspects of it, and I'm not so familiar with Sam's. I don't think I may have some stuff here on my computer, but I'm not too familiar. But you know yourself that you wanted money, you'd be making pop music. You know what I mean? You wanted eyeballs, you'd be making accessible stuff. I know for myself that the kind of stuff that I'd like to do and the kind of things that I try and harness in my energies is not what the average Joe on the street necessarily wants to see or hear. And I would say that I'm not much better on my YouTube than yours. But the thing is, like,
well, you'll have to send me a link to yours, because maybe I'll steal some of your images and use it on that channel.
I would be happy to donate them for a good cause.
Right. I will give credit. Don't worry.
But the thing is like, what I sort of feel is like, you know, you do the things you do because you want to do them. They fit well with your tinkering. You know, you're in the kitchen and you're making your curry and you're throwing it in because those are the things that you like. And that's the same with film. I would only say that you're probably a little bit more free than I am, because in reality, when you're, and bands also suffer from this from a certain degree, but if you're a filmmaker, there's a lot of moving parts. And sometimes there's so many variables that things can get lost because you have to communicate with so many people. So the vision can get lost. Now, sometimes, you know, things go better because you have so many layers and so many creatives adding things to it. But sometimes the original expression is diluted.
Sure.
Good or bad is completely up to the viewer or the listener. But it's hard for me personally, and because I find myself that I haven't found a core group of people I necessarily collaborate very well with. So I spent a lot of time ending up doing a lot of things myself. Like, you know, I never wanted to be a cameraman, but now I do my own camera. I never wanted to edit. I'm now my own editor. I am now doing sound design. I always kind of enjoyed sound design because I love sound. So to be honest, there wasn't too much of a push there for me to go there. I don't know how to do sound. I don't know how to do the tools, but I have the desire. And, you know, the desire, sound is for me like the gorgeous goth chick at the table. And you're kind of like, you're the one you're never really supposed to talk to, but the one that sort of, you know, gives you the wink on the dance floor. Now, finally, I've had a few whiskeys and I'm going to the table. And now I'm finally gonna go and slur all over. And that's what sound is to me. And the thing is that the expression of what you're trying to do for me is very, like, that's where I think the future is in a lot of ways with filmmaking, because it's happened a little bit with music. With, you know, the value you were talking about music videos for 180,000, those days, apart from Jay-Z maybe, are way gone. And nowadays we filmmakers are struggling just to make anything at all because it's so expensive. The costs of doing things, despite being accessible, are so high because there's so many layers of expenses. And I suppose there always was. But nowadays, there's no real much opportunity to get anything back. And if you look at music, you see what's popular. Solo artists are coming back further. People are dropping singles. They're not even doing albums anymore, half of them. And that's a thing that hasn't translated to film particularly well, where there's probably a new class of artistry, which is going to be sort of visual mediums and shorts that are going to come a new age, because in reality, everybody's doing everything. I mean, you're doing visual stuff, and you did some visual stuff. And I suppose that next generation is going to be doing a bit of everything because everything is so accessible to do in one place. You know, I mean, samples are so easy, and now you even got stock footage. You got all that stuff. You can do a lot with never leaving your bedroom.
Yeah.
Throw some AI in there, and you're good.
And things, yeah.
Yeah.
Mid-journey and all these kind of things. I know. If you have the time. If I was 40 years younger and had the energy that I used to have, God, you could go wherever you wanted, couldn't you, to a degree? But I suppose then the problem you've got is with so much content on there, is it's somehow finding its way through an algorithm to hit a spot, you know. But I do agree with you. It's not, unfortunately, your budget's a lot higher, so there's a lot more responsibility, let's say. But with me, there's absolutely no responsibility to anybody, and money. It would be nice if money came, but it's never a consideration. It's done for the fun, and that's a lovely thing to do. Because now I do another job which pays the rent and sends child support, etc., all those things you have to do. I'd never rely on the music to do that now, but when I get the chance to do it, It's where the fun is. You know, it's for the fun. But it would be nice, as you know, it would be nice to put up a tune and then connect it with people, not in terms of money, but in terms of you just saw a lot of people say, I love this. I love getting stoned and watching this. Or when I'm tripping, this is brilliant. Or when I'm just when I'm sad, this just makes me so happy. Or in the reverse, you know, some kind of connection. That would be nice, you know.
It's a wonderful thing when you can see people's reactions. And I mean, as a, you know, musicians maybe see it in a live format, you know, I mean, because you can see it at a concert maybe where people are into your things. And like for filmmakers, it's a little bit different because, I mean, maybe you get to see them at the cinema. Maybe people appreciate, maybe somebody writes about it. But to be able to see their faces when they're watching, that's something we don't get in cinema, because when people watch films, you're going to see the back of their head.
You
hear a few laughs in the room, but you're not going to get that visceral reaction that you would, let's say, looking at a concert hall across the dark faces in the place. And I think what's really, I mean, like yourself, you know, you can't rely on it. But at the same time, where I find the beauty of it, which is coming now, is that because all this stuff is so accessible, is like, you know, it's taking the chances, because that's in reality what I find very dull about cinema. It's very boring now because we have to tick so many boxes. We have to appease so many things just to get through the door. And then the problem is then things become the value of it is not there because people don't really want to watch it. They're on their phone while they're watching it. So you haven't got people's attention. But then at the same time, saying that the ability to really, like, when you have nothing going for you, you have all the freedom to do whatever you want because then there's no rules. And in reality, we're going through maybe the beginning. And I mean, I'm a little bit, I'm 40. So like I've seen, you know, I got the end of the 90s. 90s was good. 2000s, things got very, very different. And now I'm looking at the younger ones and they can't even sit through a movie. And I'm thinking to myself, am I a dinosaur? Am I dead? I haven't even realized it yet. Or is this now the exact time where the wave curls? Because maybe now is the time. There was a guy called Uli Lamel, and he was very involved. He was a friend of mine. He was very involved in the German punk film scene, you know, and he, you know, him and his gang of friends, they made these movies with Werner Fassbinder. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
I do. I know the name. Yeah.
So they were the pariahs of the German film industry for a while, and then they got accepted. So they turned up to the big German awards ceremony, drunk off their tits, and they decided that they were going to just piss all over the floor in the middle of this boy having arrived late at their own awards ceremony. And you know, and Uli said to me, it wasn't really about throwing a fence. It was the fact that we actually had nothing left to lose, and we were just creating, and we didn't give a damn about anybody else in the way, and they could take it or leave it. And it set with me. It's like, that's the purity of, that's what real rock and roll is. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted that energy. And that energy is hard because to prolong that is very difficult. You know, I mean, you know yourself, it takes a long time to put something together, put tracks down, and then you got to get it. You got to boost it. You got to be excited when you give it to people. It's tough. It's an endurance contest. So I imagine it's the same for yourself as well. You know, I mean,
well, I tell you what, what's a shame is I went back with COVID. We were all stuck at home. We couldn't work and stuff. And I finally went back and dug out a load of songs which I loved 30 years ago, which were songs. They were more conventional songs. And I thought, let's do those instead of doing something abstract. Let's do this, finish these conventional songs. And when I finished them, I listened to them and I think I quite like them, but they're nothing special. You know, we've moved on 30 years. What's the fucking point of putting these out? So they're gonna sit there and rot, kind of thing, because I can't get excited by them. Do you see what I mean? They almost seem too predictable or whatever. And that's a shame because that's a lot of wasted time, you know. But it was, and no, maybe it wasn't wasted time. It was bloody fun doing them. Because when you're doing them, you're right in the moment, you know. But when you finish them and you play them back and you listen to them and you say, well, do you know what? I'm glad I finished them, but I should have finished them 30 years ago when they were more relevant. You know, it's one of those, you know,
sort
of things, you know. But you know, it's
But what's amazing, right, is that I see so many trends kind of coming back. And it's the same with like music. Is funny because I was in the shopping center in the mall, and I'm seeing kids. They're 18 years old and they're picking up vinyl, and I'm looking over their shoulder to see what they're picking up, and they're picking up like grunge albums, and I'm like, that came out in 1992. You weren't even born in 1992. And I'm thinking to myself, it's like, okay, so we've come back. We're back in the 90s again. There's a whole bunch of them still in the 80s. Synths are popular again. Fantastic. I see a 16-year-old wearing a Smiths t-shirt. Like, okay, did they sell that at Penny's or Primark? Like, right. Where did you even get that? And I'm thinking to myself, well, but that's the thing, because something that you made, that it wasn't released at the time when it was relevant, is it going to get a second breath? Because that's the thing, it might not seem relevant to you and I today, but then again, we're not that generation. And that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking more and more, like, are these things going to have much more impact later? Because, I mean, I look at a lot of the trends and things nowadays, and where people have gotten very focused. They want singles, they want streaming, they want easy access. As time goes on, they're going to be looking for the next thing. They're going to be looking for what they don't have. And what they don't have, well, that's where the hunger goes. Because I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to find the most obscure. I wanted to find the thing. I was a collector of these things, these emotions, these things that were not talked about, these sounds that you could not have, this music that you had to be in the know. And certainly I was 16 years old. I wasn't even supposed to be in the places where this music existed. And it's the same with films. It was almost like you were doing something wrong. And then when I found it, it kind of gave me something else. I mean, you could argue that there's no reason to do anything nowadays, but I would say now is more relevant than ever to make sure that people are represented and your emotions and your creations are represented, because now it more than ever, the importance of having the music out there, having the art out there is more relevant than ever, because everybody has a voice, but not everybody has something good to say. And even if you don't articulate it correctly, it's part of a greater thing.
Well, I agree with you up to the point where the point being that I personally, listening back to them, they don't feel relevant to me. That's the problem, you see. It's not a question of if I stuck them out there, they're so odd to what's going on at the moment that someone would find it curious, interesting, and curious and interesting because it's not like anything at the moment. But to me, when I listen back, maybe it's because of the history of, we all have our own histories. In my history, I listen back, and it doesn't feel it's giving anything to me. Do you know what I mean? I know the effort that went in, and I remember how much I did once love them, but I kind of lost the love. Do you see what I mean?
Oh,
so that's kind of why you don't want to put them out there, because you don't believe in them. Do you know what I mean? It'd be different if you believed in them and you thought, fuck it, I don't care if nobody likes this. I love this. I've kind of lost the love of them, maybe because I left it too long, and then COVID forced me to deal with them. And you got to remember that recording stuff in the old days, the way it was saved was not in a sequencer in a computer. You had to dig out your files. You had to find all those original samples. You had to load all your samplers. You had to run your old-fashioned sequences and then stream all this into a computer so that you could then work on it. So there was a lot of effort going in just to get those old bits back to start with. You see what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the mistake I made then was I should have just left them as they were, those rough shells then, as they were written then, as opposed to now, 30 years later, doing what you think they might need. Just what I mean, because you're in a different space. You've lost the space you were in when you were doing them. So maybe then I've added too much, hot sauce when it should have been a mild dish. I don't know, So yeah. That's the problem I had with those particular tracks. But they'll just sit there. They're not on the YouTube channel at all. They're just sitting back there. But in terms of this generation, this TikTok generation, I guess if everyone's getting stuff in short bursts, They are going to wonder. I have a different analogy. I love English pubs, English pubs where you go and have a few pints and you sit down. And my whole history, when I think back, was in those English pubs in the days of punk, when you go and see little bands in the pubs and all that. And I was joking with my friends recently that in the future, when all these pubs are gone because they're too expensive and people like to drink at home because it's cheap and that, one day these young people will see on YouTube or something pubs, and they'll all sit there going, fucking hell, people used to go out and just meet there all day and have a drink and chat. Doesn't it look brilliant? And it would sort of make a revival back. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like you can lose so many things, and then one generation on, they look back and it's something very interesting. Well, at the time was very normal, but just got got left behind or whatever.
Yeah.
The vinyl thing is weird. The vinyl, I agree with you. I'm so pleased the vinyl things happened because these are Peter's words, Peter Christopherson from Coil. Peter's words are CDs are those things that people just tie to shopping trolleys, when they're homeless. That was his view on CDs. He hated them,
Oh, that's brutal.
Yeah, but that you remember when you used to buy vinyl, there was that thing you felt like you had something, With a download, you never really felt that. Maybe the younger guys do. I should ask my very young kids. My youngest kid is 13. I should ask him, what he thinks of downloads. Does he feel something, But having said that,
Danny, I think another thing is just people Randall and I are about the same age. We probably both started buying music in this kind of weird era when downloads hadn't really started yet. And correct me if I'm wrong, Randall, but vinyl was kind of on the outs too. So CDs were a big thing at the time. I mean, people we really enjoyed collecting. CDs were like the premier physical format around the late 90s. I mean, would you agree, Randall?
Absolutely. Like I never actually had vinyl in my house because
I never did either. No.
My parents didn't have it, and there were tapes. And we had those boom boxes. And
tapes
I just like tapes. I'm not going to lie. Like the amount of hours that ate my tapes.
Yeah.
It's not fun. And I used to get good use of my pencils, just sort of rolling them up. But, when CDs came out, it was perfect. You could choose what you wanted to listen to. I didn't need a pencil to play the damn thing. It was great. And it sounded pretty much the same every time I played it, where tapes, they wore out, they got crackly.
Great, yeah.
And, I bought CDs and they were accessible because they fit on a shelf. It was, you didn't have to be. I mean, the Discman thing was a bit of a con. I mean, having to try and walk like a walk just to be able to walk across the room listening to a Discman was depressing. But apart from that, it was cool and it was easy. It was compact and it sounded pretty good. For at the time, I didn't know what good was. To be honest, I was a kid and we didn't know about stereo back then. Now, obviously, the technology of digital music has improved no end. And so like maybe the differences have shortened, but that initial bunch of CDs were pretty terrible sounding. That definitely sounded better. But then like nowadays, it's very interesting because obviously on paper, there is a difference. CDs are superior musically speaking in terms of what they're able to do. I mean, you still have to play something. It still has to be mastered correctly. Otherwise, it's still going to sound crap no matter how high def it is. But the interesting thing is I came to vinyl late. But vinyl was something that I found and discovered. And then I grew very interested in because it was something that I never had before. So in reality, I felt like those kids because they never had that either. And now suddenly, they're buying whatever they're buying. I don't know what kids listen to nowadays. Some sort of emo something or other with bleepy stuff. I mean, it's all on TikTok anyway. My daughter tells me that she knows music and it goes on a streaming site, and I'm like, I talk about albums, and she's like, she calls me old. So
because people make Spotify lists on there just of the tunes they like. Let me just clarify one point. When I said Pete said that was near the end, just before he died. That wasn't when CDs come out. So CDs have been around for about 20 years. And CD sales had disappeared. So what he meant was for him to make music and make any money, he was not interested in the CDs anymore because no one was buying them. They were like just putting them on shopping carts for or whatever. But when CDs first came out, I was really positive on them because what happened is suddenly you could hear something on a CD which sounded like what you had in the studio. when we used to master the vinyl, we could never hear what we had in the studio on the vinyl because they had to take away the bass because, you know, the needle jumps and they had to do many things to it to fit it on the vinyl. So when CDs first came out, I loved them because, you know, suddenly what you heard in the studio, someone could hear at home, you know.
Yeah.
So that comment on the CDs was at the tail end of CDs when they kind of said downloads had taken over and CD sales had completely died and vinyl hadn't quite come back. Pete died before vinyl came back as a big thing. And so that was his point on that. But in terms of the sound of CDs, no, we loved them when they first came out. You know, it was lovely that you didn't have to suddenly get rid of something that was out of phase because you couldn't use out of phase with vinyl, you see, because the needle would just jump. But suddenly with CD, you could have that kind of pseudo 3D effect of out of phase. You could use it. And that was great. You know, that was lovely. So yeah, that was the point on CDs. I wanted to make that clear. Pete wasn't against CDs when they first come out. It's at the tail end, just before he died, that he made that comment. It was not. It was just because they you know, nobody was buying them anymore. He'd do a project, and it had to be. It couldn't just be made for CD, and there was no vinyl sales. So where was he going to make the money on it? You know, because he had to. You know, he was living in Thailand. The money was running out fast. He'd partied hard, and a lot of it had gone. You know, and so, you know, finance was becoming an issue. So obviously, that was where that point came from.
But it's an interesting thing, right? Like, why, you know, because nowadays you look at people and they're very sort of ADHD when it comes to music. You know, you were talking about playlists. Like, I suppose my playlist was the mixtape. We used to do mixtapes and people would do like mail exchanges and stuff like that. I mean, that was the original internet right there. You know what I mean? And you know, it's interesting because vinyl, unlike CDs, or you know, you pretty much, you put the needle down, you're listening to that record.
Right.
You're there, you're committed, you're going to listen to that record. And
you're not going to play a track, take it away, put it in its cover, take another one out, play the second track off that.
I mean,
put it back
you can, but that's a heavy investment of time if you're going to do that.
Yeah.
And not recommended. But the truth is, so it's interesting in a time where we are so kind of like, you know, on the juice all the time. Everybody think is short and quick. That in particular is sort of goes against that whole concept. And, you know, we don't have in film, we don't really have the equivalent of that because people are still on their phones and stuff like that when they're watching movies. I mean, I'm watching movies with people and nobody can put their phone down. It's absolute one day I'm going to have to get one of those cattle prods and just cattle prod everybody at the cinema.
Gee, you know, well, I'm obviously an old fart because when I put a film on, that film's on. In fact, I switch the internet off so nobody can contact me on the phone, you know, because I'm concentrating on the film. I'm obviously a dinosaur in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I see it at my own premieres. People, you can see just the blue lights. Cattle prod.
That would depress me. That would fucking make me angry. I'm sorry about that. Well, what can you do? They made the effort to come out.
You can't, but that's the thing. We haven't got essentially a vinyl equivalent. I mean, you can say Blu-rays or whatever are the same, but it's not the same because it doesn't have the same. I suppose the same relevance in terms of what it does. Because if you watch a movie on a streaming, you're not really going to be able to tell the difference if it's on. I mean, unless you're a quality nut, in which case you're watching 4K Blu-rays. But the average Joe sees 4K and it's 4K. You know what I mean?
I gotcha.
Do you ever foresee that changing, Randall? Because do you ever foresee like a VHS, you know, a aftermarket VHS, you know, come back kind of the way vinyl did?
You know, I think physical media isn't going anywhere. I think, you know, as it gets rarer, there will be more desire for it. Because like I said, I think, you know, there was a period of time where everything was free. I mean, everybody was torrenting. Right. So asking people to pay for it was a tall order. I mean, I never stopped buying CDs and things because I love music. And the way I consume my media is just, I like to have it. You know, it feels good when I look at it on the shelf. I like to take it out. It's a commitment. I'm sitting there, I'm going to watch this or I'm going to listen to this. That's why to this day, I don't care what anybody says. I'm buying CDs till there's none left.
Right.
With vinyl, I mean, streaming is fine. It's fine in the car. I have a streamer. But it doesn't give me as much. And then my listening habits change, just as my watching habits too. If I'm on a streamer service, I will not be committed. It's just I naturally just have my phone in my hand, or I'm doing something else, or I'm half watching. But when I put a disc on, then it's a different thing. I put that thing down. I turn the internet off. But that's because I'm committing. Like I've actually got off. I've looked for it on the shelf. I put it in, and I'm intending to watch this. Where channel surfing is a very different thing, and that's
Sure.
I suppose where I think comes back. The next generation is probably going to want to do the complete opposite of what they're doing right now. And I think there will be a real resurgence of people who want to watch 3-hour black and white Russian movies with no dialogue, because that's as far away from what is popular today as it is. And I think that kind of avant-garde kind of stuff is absolutely going to come back. And I don't doubt it's going to happen. With music, it's a bit different because, again, there's so much ability and you have so much money. It's not just the only factor that comes into music. I mean, a lot of people create music at home nowadays, which allows a lot of very obscure, very, very avant-garde stuff to get out. The rest of it is just access. But I think the consumption of it, people can consume a lot more music quickly than they can consume film, for example, where videos don't count as film, but film, like the traditional film, which perhaps is going to change because, again, maybe we might start seeing the rise of the short film or the short video becoming more of a thing.
Right.
Not sure I'm going to enjoy that. Not sure the cinema's going to enjoy that very much.
Talking of cinemas, I've got to be honest, I haven't been to the cinema for years. Do they still have big cinemas? Because there was that thing where they chopped all the cinemas into multiplexes, and I thought the thing about going to the cinema was the enjoyment was having this massive screen. You know, that was part of the thing. Do they still exist? Can you still go somewhere with a massive screen, or is it like 8 little cinemas in one kind of thing?
Well, it's a lot like, they recently opened up HMV back in Ireland, and I went in and I was so excited. And I was like, HMV, back to the 90s. And, there were a whole lot of Funko Pop things. I don't really get them, but they were there, toys and Marvel T-shirts. And it's a lot like the cinema. When you go in there, they've got special seats, and you can sit with your missus in the same seat. Now, personally, I like my own seat, but whatever. I mean, it's there. And the screens are big, and they have this sound that's amazing, Atmos. But it's definitely an event because it's like kind of expensive nowadays. So the problem is that you can't stop that the movies are not what you want to see. I mean, unless you're into like franchise movies, which is basically all of it. There isn't really as much in, like, if you wanted to go and see like a good thriller, you're very hard pressed to find one because there just isn't really, you never see where, when I was growing up, you could go and see like a mid-tier independent thriller where there'd be crime and there'd be violence and it'd be great. Nowadays, you're going to watch some sequel, a remake or whatever, and you're going to see it in a huge screen with overpriced popcorn, which, to be fair, hasn't really changed in my time. To be honest, it was always overpriced. But it's definitely going to be, it's a different thing. It's a different experience. But where my brother lives in America, and he was saying to me, what is a big trend that's coming back is these gourmet cinemas, like where you can go there, you can sit on a really comfortable couch, watch maybe a classic movie and get sushi or something. So it's more of an experience than just watching the movie.
Oh, they've had that kind of thing in Bangkok for many years. In fact, I think that's the last film I went to see 15 years ago with couches and the luxury and...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sushi and the Goonies is basically what you end up with.
It's I mean, I can't really knock cinema because I haven't added my coins to it. But once your kids grow up, it seemed like the excuse had gone. You'd always, when the kids were younger, when I was married in England, I'd end up seeing all those Lord of the Rings films, what was the other ones? Harry Potter, the early Harry Potters and that, because of the kids, you'd go because the kids, you've got to take the kids. But the last film I actually saw myself, as an adult, I think, with no kids, was in Bangkok, years ago. Yeah, and it had couch. I was like amazed. I went in there. There's your couch with your blanket, and you got your girlfriend. You got a blanket. You got a couch. You got this cinema, which was quite big. The food and beer and all kinds of stuff. It was very luxurious. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's the theme park experience now. You're getting an experience, which, in fairness, like when I was growing up, like we'd go, if you had a date, you'd go to the cinema, or like you'd want to do something on the Friday. Like before I was able to go out and drink, the cinema was where you went.
Yeah.
You'd see if you could make out. That would be good. You can get popcorn and make out with somebody. That would be great. Because other than that, or you weren't getting in. I was under 18, so. Right. That was kind of the experience. But nowadays, I suppose that's not the same experience that people have nowadays. And I went to a lot of art house cinemas back in the day, and they were a little bit more rough and ready. See, like very intellectual type films. I think I actually even watched Blue. Funny enough, in a cinema in Chelsea, in London. It was a posh cinema. They have wine. They didn't have any good popcorn, which was a disaster. But I think it's not the kind of movie you want to eat popcorn to anyway, to be honest. But I actually think I did there was a Derek Jarman festival, and I think it was Blue, and there was another one I watched there. That was before I had actually I didn't know what I was watching. And then I got there, and I thought they broke the screen. Something's wrong with the picture. Because I didn't know. I had known. I heard of this director because back then there was Empire magazine. There was, to get, and if you were really young to try and get into the film industry, you had to kind of know. Right. So I got to see it was the Derek Jarman season. I think it was Chelsea. And it was this one, and I was double bill. So I got there and I thought, oh, so it's this for 85 minutes. And then, I sat there and I was like, okay, that's money well spent. They should at least cut the ticket in half. I'm only going to get half the media. But then, that's the thing. I got captivated by it because then, I got mesmerized because, it is hypnotic. Until you see something like that on an experience like that where you can't look away, and it was a big screen, and it's the hypnosis of it. And that's what I think most people will never get. You'll never get that sitting at home and watching that, because I've seen many times since. And like I said, on VHS, which, to be fair, it's a little rough and ready, but that experience was very interesting because there was no escape. You were in, and the hypnosis of the voice and the sounds in a very big room where there wasn't that many. It was Derek Jarman. There wasn't that many people there, and I think it was like 3 or 4 o'clock on a Saturday, and I was sitting there, and there must have been 15 people in the room, and I was sitting there. I didn't know. I was the youngest person there, and I was watching this thing, and it was hypnotized. And then after a while, you almost could close your eyes because you were being transported. And for me, like these things, that's why they hold a lot of memories for me, because I'm a very much a person who likes to collect these things. These things are very important to me. And that's why these experiences in life for me are so vital. I find it very difficult because I'm always so supercharged about everything that I do. And they influence a lot because these micro moments, they inspire, because I don't think I could have got what I got if I hadn't seen it in that way. And I suppose you get that a little bit in music as well, when you've seen a concert or something, and where it's very intimate and you're pulled into it. And I was hanging on every word by the end of it. And, the sound, and it was loud, it's like, the next time I watched it was on a 4x3 TV. Right. And when I was a film student. And although, I noticed other things, I was more, but it didn't have the same effect. And I don't know if when Derek Jarman was making it, is this what he had in mind, or is that just how I got it? Because that's the thing with your audience. You're never going to know. Maybe people will tell you, your music did this to me, or, it inspired me to get up and do that, or maybe it didn't do anything for me. But until you can kind of sit in a room and you can kind of absorb, because I'm sure he must have been on his last legs, and he was thinking, what is my relevance? What does this mean? Why am I going to do this? Because it's a pretty ballsy challenge to the world, is to he could have, a man of his distinction could have pretty much done many things, but that was the last thing he did. And it was probably, in many ways, it was the most transgressive thing he ever did, because you watch it and it's so it's hypnotic when I watched it. Like I'll never forget, because I remember being kind of embarrassed because I looked around. I was like, oh shit, it's going to be like this, really? And then by the end, I found myself leaning forward, and it's like the room was silent. I just leaning forward because it was whatever it was doing, it was pulling me in, and it was hypnotic. Like, you should go and watch it again. And this time,
you know what? I was gonna say, you've already inspired me to go and dig out the copy. I know I've got it in the tea chest there where I keep all the certain of the old Coil things that I'm never going to sell. I'll go and open up the tea chest and I'll find it. But I don't have a DVD player anymore, so it'll be a question of converting it into the computer thing and streaming it to the TV. But we'll get there. We'll get there.
But that's what I mean. It's like,
I think the description inspires anyone to check it out.
but it's fantastic because these moments, and you know that, I mean, maybe you get this as well, Danny. You've created so much stuff. I mean, your body of work is quite large, and you go and, as you said, you tinker. But there must be some stuff that you perhaps haven't thought about very often, and you sort of think, I was very primitive early in my career. I'm much better now. And maybe you will go back to that at some point, and you'll listen to it again, and maybe you'll hear it with different ears, and you might say, "Well, I'm much better nowadays. I have way more technical proficiency." But you will hear why and maybe you'll remind yourself why you did it, why you made it.
No, I
that with myself.
I've got 2 points there. I'm going to jump in on there. I have a huge box of cassettes. In the early days in studio, before there was DAT recorders, okay, if you wanted to do a rough mix, you mixed it to cassette, you took it home, you listened to it on a cassette player, okay? I got a huge box of cassettes, dug out the cassette player, which had cost me a bloody fortune back in whenever, the 80s, whenever I bought it. And I plugged it in and I set it up. And of course, the belt had completely, evaporated. There's no belt to drive the thing. So I couldn't play these cassettes. So I bought this funny little cheap thing, which promised me that I could put my cassettes into the computer and listen to them. But it's only mono. But what I found was a lot of those really early... Have you frozen there?
No?
Oh, no. I thought you'd frozen.
I'm just still hanging on every word.
I thought he'd frozen. Anyway, what I found with these cassettes, which was in the really early days when I had no clue what I was doing, but the client had gone home early and I didn't want to go home. I'm in the studio. The client's gone home early. It's free time. There's nothing to do. I'm going to play. Like, you've just discovered a studio that's got a Fairlight. Let's play with the Fairlight. But you weren't, you couldn't actually commit anything to expensive 2-inch tapes. You find a bit of old 2-inch tape, you'd do your little tune quickly, you'd mix it down to cassette and you'd wipe the 2-inch tape. It's just something you did. Well, I found those cassettes, and I tell you what, I loved them because I had no idea what I was doing at the time. And so the tune doesn't go anywhere you think it might go because I didn't know where I was going. Those I really love. They were the very early things I really love. But the one mistake I did make is I did my first Aural Rage album. It was the only one time I ever made a decision. I decided it was going to be as far away from Coil as possible because everybody was expecting me to do a Coil thing. And that was a mistake because the only people that wanted to listen to it in the beginning were fans of Coil. And of course, it got torn to pieces because nobody understood what I was trying to do. That was where I was trying to do something. I was trying anything that sounded remotely like Coil, except the one track I co-wrote with them, which was on there. Anything that sounded remotely like Coil, I got rid of. So I was making a conscious decision to try and go away from it. And that was a mistake because then you're limiting yourself. You're saying, no, I can't do that because that follows this rule instead of just being free. And I regret that a lot. I was trying so hard to be far away from Coil that I didn't know where I was going. Do you see what I mean? That's the one regret I do have. But from the very early things that I did when I had no idea what I was doing and no machinery, even before I bought my first sampler, it was just studio equipment. On that cassette, they're so terrible. It's so terrible quality. It's from mono and it's all hissy. But when I listen to the tune, I say, do you know what? That's fucking great. I could never replicate it now. I can never try and do it again because I don't know how I made those sounds. And I don't know. It's something bizarre. Those I like. Those I really like. Maybe it's because they're you just don't know where they've come from because you didn't know what you were doing at the time. Those I really do like. What I don't like is some of Nature of Nonsense when I was consciously trying not to be Coil because then I was trying to do something. You see what I mean?
You're trying too hard to fit a mold. I totally get it.
Yeah, because I was very aware that if I did anything that remotely sounded like Coil, it was going to be, it's too much like Coil. So I was trying. That was the only time I ever tried to do anything, to try and not do something. And that limits you. As soon as you start limiting yourself, you might as well have a record company there who at least give you a budget and say, we want it to sound like that. At least you'll be getting some money for the bloody thing. That's the only time I do regret. I should have just fucking done what the hell I wanted to do. And if I liked it, I liked it. And if I didn't like it, I didn't like it. And that's the only criteria that mattered. That's what I should have done.
Absolutely. And that's what I totally get, because the thing is like, everybody wants to create something that's favorable and you want to appeal, but at the same time, you don't want to be blasé. You don't want to be just repeating yourself. It's very difficult for me because at the same time, I tend to do the same things over and over again and the same themes. And I'm thinking, it's very similar to what I did. Am I just being a caricature of myself? There's nothing worse than making a pastiche, but to do a pastiche of yourself is even worse. And but then you can get bogged down trying the complete opposite, and then you end up with something that you're not happy with, and it's shit. Because in reality, what you do is what you do. It's from you. It's how your mind is connected and how you express yourself through sonic themes in your music. But with me, it's visual, and I did it with. I published a book of poetry and photographs, and everything was things of decay, buildings, nature exploding through old buildings and things like that. A lot of, and I wrote basically. I would take the picture and then the images and things. It was as a way of sketching ideas, right? And I did it in sepia because I always liked sepia. So I did a book of sepia, and then I started the second volume, and I realized that I had to do something completely different. And I thought, because the first lot of things, it was done on a phone, it was very grungy. Now I was going to use like Soviet era lenses to like make it even more bizarre, more toys basically. And I thought to myself, like, am I going to just try and do a cover version of what I just did of myself because it kind of was popular, and I wasn't trying before, it just happened? Or is now the evolution where I kind of take the best of those things and try and move? It's very difficult to balance, and you won't know until it's done whether you did. And maybe it will take several years before you realize whether it has or has not happened. But I think that's the problem, is like if you worry too much, you'll never make yourself happy or anybody else, because everybody just already wants to dismiss everything anybody else does anyway. So, but if you do it because this is me, I'm doing it, I don't care if you like it or not, boom, and you remove money out of it, and you say, right, if people buy it, great. If they don't, fuck off. Then you suddenly have this freedom, and suddenly the real ideas can come through because you're not worried about trying to make people like it. And that's for me one of the things that it's one of the things I'm learning even as my career goes on. And I haven't done the things that you have done, but it's trying to create things and not be held back by what you think people are going to enjoy, and just do it. And if it's honest, and if you think that this is good, I put a lot into it, and it came from somewhere that was me. It wasn't me trying to be like anything else. Then you might have something that, at least for the very worst, you can say people hated it, but they're stupid. I know it's good. That's it. And that's how I look at it. And maybe you're the same, or maybe not.
Well, no. I'm very, very, very similar. But you just reminded me of those old stories of those tunes I was telling you when I was playing in the studio. I remember once some staff. This never happened when I worked with bands, but some staff from someone in the building above, in an office above, came down and said, "What's that playing? I love it." It was one of those things that I was fucking around, just the fucking around tune when the client's gone. And another time I was in another studio and I'd been working all night on this thing. It was really moody and I loved it. I was really in the mood. And suddenly the cleaner burst in. I didn't know the cleaner was due at 6 a.m. or whatever. And he was this foreign guy. I can't remember. I don't know where he was from, Colombia or somewhere. And he said, "What's this playing? It's fantastic." Now, I never had that on a paying session. There are 2 times that I remember vividly, and I look back and I say, do you know what? You may have been messing around. You may have not known what you were doing, but it was good. But you just didn't have the confidence at the time to go with it. You just put it on your cassette and wipe the 2-inch tape, and it can never exist again. You know, and I remember those reactions. And I look back and I think of all the times I was with famous bands, and nobody ever came down at the end of the mix from another office and said, "What's that? I can hear it. It sounds great." Unless they were coming into the flat of someone famous, you know. So yeah, it's you know, please yourself and feel good about it. And it's going to connect with someone somewhere for sure. It seems.
Sam, what do you reckon?
Reckon about what? I mean, it's a bit different for me because I'm a kind of a perpetual backing player. So, you know, my output is always kind of tied into other people's artistic decisions in some way, which has its ups and it has its downs. But one of the main downs for me, you know, being a supporting musician, and, you know, is that for every, and this probably ties into what you were talking about earlier, Danny, about how much easier it is to do music now. There are a lot of people, you know, making music that don't maybe have the discipline, or they don't have the follow through or the focus to finish what they start. So you end up working on a fair amount of projects over the years that don't get completed, where you will record your parts, you will track, you know, your takes. I've got, you know, eight channels, 16 channels, you know, rough mixing it at home, or sometimes going into a studio, and you'll get to the point where, you know, for whatever reason or the other, because of someone else that you're working with, it doesn't get finished. And that becomes, you know, as a drummer, that can be very frustrating, to learn, you know, songs, to develop, you know, the fills, you know, the feel for the song, how you want to enhance the song. And then to have somebody be like, "Oh man, I didn't get around to it." Like,
oh yeah, yeah.
You know, working with other people in the way that you do, you probably had that happen a lot over the years. But I maybe this is just me being old and cynical, but it seems to happen more now because it's easier to do music now. So you get more people who maybe, you know, back in 1990 wouldn't have even bothered. You know, they would have looked at, you know, the sequencers and loading the samples that you'd had, and they'd be like, "Oh no, man, I could never do that." But, you know, now that it's just you know, a freeware laptop program, yeah.
Sam, you are lucky in one respect. If you were older, if you'd been a drummer around the time Linn drums came on, when the Linn drum came on the scene, I'd gone from a thing where I was setting up 3 drum kits a day, let's say for a short advert or a short jingle or whatever, and really good drummers would come in, you know, they're old jazz drummers or whatever, do their piece and gone. Suddenly when the Linn drum come, everybody thought drummers weren't needed anymore. So for a big period of time, they weren't appreciated. Oh, I can do that on a machine. I can do that on a machine. You know, the number of times I saw that. Luckily, it passed that point when suddenly you can appreciate real drummers, you know. I mean,
yeah.
You can, the feel of a real drum kit or a real drummer is, you know, it's not in the machine, you know, of the bar. But there was a period where poor old drummers just were not getting the work. It just dried overnight. Just overnight, it just went boom, you know. And it was a horrible time because I had to say, I was one of those idiots in the studio who suddenly discovered this Linn drum and thought it was the greatest thing ever because I didn't have to put out 15 mics for a drum kit, you know. But it was a sad time, you know, for drumming. It was a very sad time. So it's a shame if it's come back to that. But what you were saying is working on a project and giving your heart to it, and then the bugger's not finishing it. That would be depressing. I got to say, that would be a bit depressing, especially if you thought that was rocking, that was kicking, that was.
Yeah, that's the thing about. The normal protocol is for the drum parts to be the first thing done. So that'll be the part that always gets done before, you know, so before anything else can take place. So you have the highest likelihood of someone else not pulling weight, you know, down the line.
See, that's a change then. You will never remember the time where we had the drum kit screened off from the bass player, screened off from the guitarist, screened off from the singer, and they're all going. They'll do the take together, and then the parts will be patched up. Because there's a feel of them playing together. In the very early days, that's what we were doing. And then it became,
being completed too, because it's all done at the same time, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was tough because if somebody had done a fantastic take, the band were really happy with it, but you knew that your snare mic had fucking decided that you hadn't tightened it enough and had fallen halfway through, or whatever rubbish. Something technical had happened. It was a disaster, but there must be something nice. Again, I'm not a musician, so I don't know, but there must be. I've always been a bit by bit guy. We put bit by bit by bit, but it must be something nice as a musician to be able to kind of groove off each other, as opposed to you put the tape down. It seems to me kind of strange that I always feel that if I was a drummer, I'd like the bass player with me, kind of thing, or whatever.
It's more precise, I would say, but if you have people that haven't necessarily been playing together for a long period of time, sometimes it takes some time of playing together to build that chemistry.
Sure.
So I mean, it's done. The separate tracking. I mean, I've tracked with people that I've never met in my life before. So it does open up that possibility, but it does some of, I guess, what you call like the living feel of a performance. Is more present with a live in studio recording than with a stage by stage track recording. I would agree with that.
Right.
Older, they do have a more unique feel to them, and it's against those slight imperfections that are some of the things that give classic music its character, I think.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. Well, I must admit, I don't know about other people, but I certainly appreciate drummers now. But like I say, what idiots we were when the Lindrum came along. We thought, we've been given gold. We've been given the secret gold. No respect for the skill of the guy that'd been practicing his whole life on a drum kit and tuning his drum kit before. It just seemed like, wow, we don't have to go through all that hassle of microphoning them up and tuning the drums, etc., etc., etc. But looking back, it was a backward move, But at the time, you don't know, you don't realize. And maybe into a certain respect, it wasn't a backward move for industrial music or house or, maybe they wouldn't have come along, or jungle. They wouldn't have come along if we didn't have machines, so.
Certain aesthetic, but for more organic, for, rock or especially something like jazz, it would be ridiculous, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. Right, so I think we went through some very, very interesting things here, and we've reached some, I think, essential conclusions, especially this bit about, the passion and the confidence at the heart of it. So I almost feel bad in steering towards more particular things, but I think they're still pretty interesting for our listeners. So, Danny, quite some time ago, you briefly mentioned Hellraiser, the movie that you met Peter and John when they were doing it. So I'm not sure if you, during that time, and if you can debrief us about the sort of the inside story about how that went, their soundtracking, and then not making it to the final cut.
I don't know about the final cut because I weren't aware that we're doing it for a film. But what I do remember, you've got to understand, when you're a freelance engineer, you go to a studio, will call you up and say, look, we got a session. Do you want to do it? It's 3 days long. You go and do it. You have no idea who it's going to be. So you're doing all kinds of sessions. You're doing, this particular studio was the first computerized studio pretty much in Europe where, it had Fairlights and wave terms and everything was, keyboards. It was not an old style studio. It was a very small recording room, millions of keyboards and machines. And you'd end up, you could work with a million different types of people. And one day I got this call, these couple of guys, they're local, they want to do, but they want to work for the night. They don't want to do days, they want to work for the night. Do you want the session? I said, yeah, great, I'll have the session. And I got down there and there's these two kind of strange guys. And I got to tell this story because it's a part of it. But I'd been in Amsterdam not long before. I was 21. When I was 21, I was in Amsterdam not long before, and I said to a friend of mine, I said, I really want to get some Coke. Go and get me some Coke, And he came back with LSD, and I didn't know what the fuck it was. He said, "Oh, I got these things," and I said, "What are they?" He said, "They're LSD." I said, "Oh, I've heard about that from the '60s. Let's have some of that." Of course, it was 6 of the most wonderful hours of my life and 6 of the most hellish hours of my life. Now, I was still recovering from this when I met Coil, and we were in the middle of these sessions, and they were doing this Hellraiser music. And there was something about Peter. You're just such an open person. I thought, I have to tell this guy this story of this hell I've just had in Amsterdam. Maybe I need somebody to understand what the fuck's going on in my head. And I told the story to them, And I think that bonded us, because straight away they thought, well, this is a freelance engineer that we just happen to, have assigned to us on these sessions, but he's obviously just not your normal guy, he's obviously been somewhere else as well. And suddenly they start playing toy pianos and kind of making hellish nursery music, like scary nursery music, with like little children's pianos with ding, 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 and like little bells and things and, and stuff. And I don't know, it's something connected after the horror of Amsterdam, and then meeting these two people who are in a different place. It just became real, real fun. That's the only memories I've got of that, because obviously we moved on to Rotorvator, which took a lot more time, and that's when I got to know them a lot more. But the Hellraisers thing, we just did lots of tunes, a very simple, I guess you'd call it nightmare nursery music. But I wasn't aware they were doing it for the Hellraiser film. I just knew it as 2 guys who were 2 clients of a studio that asked me to go and do these sessions, and they didn't want to work in the days. They only wanted to work through the nights. And they were great fun to be with, And then, I don't know, after about a week or something, I saw them start to kiss. And I thought, oh, maybe they're a couple. Oh, okay, they're a couple. Fine, they're a couple, And I don't know, we just got on really well. And that's my memory of. I haven't got so much memories of those Hellraiser. They were really fast. I mean, I don't know how many. I don't know how many tunes end up in the final album, but I remember we did about 20 different tunes. They were really, ding ding ding, and then something else, and then something else. But Horse Rotorvator, I remember a lot clearer, because by then I knew them, and we were doing more time, longer sessions, and I remember Pete. He'd recorded something on a cassette tape in Mexico, and he said, "I want to use this." People never did that. In Paradise Studio, you had this high-end machinery, like Fairlights were, I don't know, 20, 30,000 pounds or whatever. I mean, there was hundreds of thousands of pounds of machinery, and he wanted to use this little cassette recording he'd made of these children in Mexico, And I like that. I thought I like that, because it was breaking the pattern of the normal, the normal client would come in, see all these machines and want to use them. I've got to use these machines. I paid the money, and all these machines, I'm going to use them. And here was a guy turning up with a cassette recording, a street recording of something that he picked up in Mexico, and that was going to be the main thing that we were going to use. That was kind of nice as well. That was interesting. You've got to remember, in the early 80s. Think about 80s music. Think about Stock Aitken and Waterman. Think about the machinery, the music machines that were knocking out they weren't knocking out the quality of Motown, but they had the Motown philosophy, i.e. in-house, banging out hits and whatever. That everyone was trying to copy that. So suddenly you got these 2 guys come in. If it's not toy pianos, it's they've got to work through the night. And if it's not that, it's I've got the street recording from Mexico. It was just so far away from everything that everybody else was doing that you couldn't help but have fun, And the fact that they happened to be really nice guys as well was a real bonus on top, So that's my memories of that. It's going back a long way,
Well, I think that anyone who listens to Coil probably has an intuition of that they were doing that kind of stuff. They were doing really groundbreaking, and that there was a very open spirit going on there, very creative, very boundless sort of a very boundless type of creativity and creative exertion. I think that's something that you can hear through the music. So yeah, well, I know these are very indeed, it's well, we were talking about it was 87, I think. Well, the movie came out in 87, so
Which
that's
one?
Hellraiser.
Oh, right. Yeah. Do you know, it was only years later when I got a copy of that particular album, when Pete gave me a copy of that album, I heard the story that music was written for the film, but Clive Barker or somebody or studio decided that, not to go with it. It was only later I discovered that that's what we were doing, See, again, that's part of their character, because a lot of guys would have walked in and, flustered in and tried to impress you straight away. Oh, by the way, we're doing this for this movie, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, there was none of that. They just, we're going to tinker with toy pianos, and they wouldn't give you the backstory of what it was for. There was no trying to impress you, and that was another positive thing. It was just, let's do this, And I like that, because, the music business is probably the same as the film business, the advertising business. There are certain characters. The first thing they do is they try and bombard you with how good they are before you even start the thing, or how important this project is, or whatever. And it puts pressure that's not really necessary, So I was not aware. I just thought it was two mad guys who happened to only live a couple of streets away from the studio by coincidence. I figured they were just a couple of guys, had a couple of quid spare, decided they want to go in and play with some make some children themes, Had no idea what it's for. At that point, I wasn't aware that Pete had been in Throwing Gristle, you see. These were just two guys, Pete and Jeff, that just wandered in the door. I didn't know any of their history or anything, Psychic TV, didn't know they had any connections with any of that lot or anything, so... But
I was gonna ask about maybe the later albums like Love Secret, because another thing with Coil is that they went through a lot of stylistic changes, right? I think none of their albums sounds like any other of them. So are there also any interesting episodes? Well, I presume there are, about, for example, Love Secret Domain, which was a very very interesting sound and very different from everything that they had done previously.
I think a big part of that, and it can't really be disputed, but a big part of that was I done a deal with Akai, and I got some machines. I got an MPC 60 and I got an Akai S1000, and that, suddenly you've got a sequencer on hand and a sampler permanently on hand, so you can knock stuff together outside the studio, or you can do beats and things outside. And I think that's what pushed that the way that it did, was the new machine. The one story I do have of you were talking earlier, I made a wrong point when I said people didn't say don't do that. The only time Jeff would say you do something, and Jeff had a phrase, you'd say, no, that's old Coil. But you do something you think he'd like based on what went before. And John had a phrase where he'd say, no, we can't use that. That's old Coil. And that, I think that encapsulates what you're saying, that everything moved to something different, But I get lots of fans, Coil fans, and they always say, that was Coil, or that was Coil, but that was Coil. But you've hit the nail on the head. What Coil was always be something different. That was very important to Jeff, particularly. He didn't want to repeat the same formula. So that was the only rule. And that was not really a rule, but you just have to do something which would maybe really dark, and he'd be like, no, that's old Coil. I don't want that, because that's too much like old Coil. That was the only thing. So he was basically saying, just do it. Don't try and think what we like. Just do something. And if it's something that we haven't heard before, we'll probably like it, kind of thing. Just what I mean? So you're right. There was never a machine knocking out, let's do Love Secret Domain 2 or whatever.
Oh, but I think it does make sense, though, because if, as you were saying, if this spirit was maintained of this very free-form creative space, I think it would be it would be difficult to replicate the same sound even if you actively tried to. So I think it only makes sense that the albums turned out very different.
I think you're right. If you try to, if they said, right, a year or two later, okay, we're going to go and make Love Secret Domain 2. Let's get the same team together. Let's get everybody together. Let's go and do it. You're right. We would have sat there twiddling our thumbs because to tell you the truth, we didn't know how we got there in the first place. So how are we going to get back there? Do you see what I mean? It's
exactly. There you
and
go.
that's what made it such fun, is you never knew where the journey was going to go. You know, I mean, if I was an accomplished musician, I think we could have gone completely nutso somewhere else, you know. But they forgave me my lack of musicianship in my I'll try something else then thing. You know, they were very forgiving, you know.
Danny, I had a question. What was your experience like working with some of the other musicians in Coil? And I don't mean John and Peter. I mean like Thighpaulsandra or Stephen Thrower or any. They're the ones who were the musicians. What was that like?
Well, TPS I never worked with, because what happened with Steve. With Steve, I worked with Steve on Love Secret Domain, on Horse Rotorvator, and a little bit of Stolen and Contaminated. But I like Steve, but I didn't realize there was a war going on between him and Jeff, you know, at the time, you know, over, and I don't want to knock Steve, he's still alive, but I think at the time Steve had some drug problems at the time, you know, and it was depressing Jeff, you know, maybe he was missing meetings or whatever, I don't know, but there was this background thing going on and you could feel it a little bit. So that wasn't so much fun. With Drew, it was good fun. We did a few things, and then we went to New Orleans, and Drew was always fun. And then I took a break away because of the problems with Backwards. With problems, I've got to interject something here, which might explain the story a little bit better. In that, I've been writing a lot of stuff with Coil, as you know, as a drummer. I mean, you might write something, you might write a fill that becomes the main thing, and you always do it because it's such fun and you love them and everything. But when we got to Backwards, I sat down before we went to New Orleans and I said, look, a lot of these tracks I've actually written and brought to you, so I'm going to ask for publishing on this. I've got to have, you know, we've got to sit down and talk. I've got the dictaphone recording of it. It got quite heated. Jeff and me were shouting a bit. Pete was calming us down about the splits on certain songs. Right, the split is this, the split is this. I said, look, we've got to get serious. We're going over there to Interscope. It could be a big release, and I'm going to protect myself now. I want written publishing on this. I'm fed up with giving that away, and now just take it, whatever, you know. Now I'm more than just the engineer guy. And they said, yeah, okay, we agree. We all agreed it, and it was agreed. And then when Backwards didn't come out because of some problem with Interscope, I got really depressed. So it's now about 1997, 1998. Still Backwards wasn't being released, you know, after finally I was going to get some royalties on something instead of just giving them away. And it was being held up by a record company. And I got so pissed off. I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm done with this music business. I just had my second child. I had suddenly a second daughter to deal with. And I said, I'm out of the business. And I stopped. I just left the business. I went to work for a TV company doing TV broadcasting. And that's when TPS come in. So I missed that point when TPS come in, which was a real shame because it was nothing to do with him. It was nothing to do with Coil. It was just record company bullshit. Because like I mentioned earlier, when World Serpent went down, we lost a load of money. Well, two of the songs that World Serpent were releasing, I had actually got the publishing on. And then suddenly they went down without paying the royalties. So suddenly when this Backwards thing happened, it was just, you know, I've got a wife, I've got two young kids. And it's like, what the hell am I doing? You know, the first time I'm finally going to get something on paper. And now the record company have decided to help, because with Backwards was different. Pete paid for everything, but once we got involved with Trent and we went over to Trent's place and he gave us a studio for free and he was fantastic. But Interscope were going to do the release, you know, Interscope Records. So it was now big time. And apparently they had Pete was not happy with some of the requirements that they wanted. They wanted Pete to sign a thing where he'd only do videos for them or something. There was something that was nothing to do with the music. And it went on and on and on and on. And in the end, I just got sick of it. I'm fed up with this bloody music business. I'm fed up with it. I've got these young kids. I've got a wife nagging me, where's the money coming? And I keep telling her the royalties and blah, 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 blah. So I left for a couple of years and TPS come in, and I love the stuff they did then. And he actually gave them the confidence to play live because they would never wanted to play live. And so I missed all of that. I missed all that fantastic period. And about 2002, I thought, you know what? I really miss music. So me and Pete, we'd always been speaking, but I got back in touch with Pete and I said, you know what, Pete, I really fancy coming back to the fold. We're done with that. Backwards is done, whatever, it'd be nice to move on. So I went over to the house in Weston-super-Mare and we wrote some stuff. TPS wasn't there. And then suddenly I blink and Jeff dies. Jeff falls down the stairs, it was a huge house. And Jeff is over drunk and fell from the top of the stairs. So I get an email from Pete. We're in the middle of things. I get an email from Pete. I'm sorry to tell you, but Jeff's died last night, or whatever. So then the whole thing came to a stop. And the only time I saw TPS was at the funeral of Jeff's. So I can't comment on the music. He was a proper musician, sure. But most importantly, he was, I think, the sole person that got them to play live. So anybody who got to see them live, they have him to thank, because Jeff never wanted to go live, never, for whatever reason. So he obviously talked them in, gave them the confidence to do that. I did actually, luckily enough, get to see them at one live show. So I suppose I met TPS in a way. I did the sound at the Barbican show, but again, I'm dealing with Peter. I always dealt with Peter. He was my point man. Rather than, you must have the same. You're coming for a drum, you deal with one, but you can't deal with everybody. You deal with one point man.
Yeah.
And I love the stuff they did. Music's Playing in the Dark too. I've got absolutely nothing of mine on that. And I think it's fantastic. So, where they would have gone could have been fantastic. But unfortunately, Jeff died and I never had the opportunity to be involved with TPS and where it would have gone. And then once Pete moved it was bizarre, once Pete moved to Thailand and we started working over there, that would have been a good time to get him over there. But we never did. I suppose Pete was just happy doing what we were doing, But maybe it would have been great if he'd shipped over there and give us a hand, but it never happened. So yeah, I've got no comment except it's because of him they did live, for sure, and some of the album stuff he did with them was great, but they were moving that way anyway. I know Pete particularly was getting into clicks and beeps and things, that was really his thing. He was getting into that simplicity of the static little and stuff, So that's my comment on that. Yeah, like I said at the beginning, Coil to me was Pete and Jeff. We were all lucky enough to be in the room, to have the fun with them. But if and we added bits and we added some and we added a little bit here and a little bit there, but they were the core. Nothing would have ever happened without them. They were almost like the producer. You're the producer, but they're the producer. And you find yourself doing a little keyboard tinker. And they'll do they had ultimate control, and that's the way it had to be because it was their baby, more so than the many bands I've seen. Many bands I've seen that they fragment. They last 2 years. They last the year. These guys are they lasted a while, So yeah, unfortunately, no real stories on that. When we got string players and stuff, we got people in, outside musicians to come in, like Mark Alban come in and sing. I can comment on those, but not the guys that were members of the band. Like I say, Steve was early on, and I liked him. He was a very dark presence. But there was something going on in the background. And suddenly Steve was gone. He was surplus to requirements. And then Drew came in and I liked Drew. He was a good lad. He was a lovely guy. And we did a few years with that. And then we all went out to New Orleans and worked there. And then I left the music business for a few years. And by the time I came back, Drew wasn't around. Simon was around, or Ossian, as he likes to call himself, was around. And he was at Western Supermare. But I think the most important thing they now got into was they had those more folky guys. You know, the kind of remote viewer. You must that record, Remote Viewer.
Yeah.
Record. Where they had the old English instrument. The guys that could really play, but they played old English instruments. Those guys have been brought in. Tom and I can't remember his name. I only met them at the live gig, but I mixed Remote Viewer, and they were getting more involved. So they were certainly becoming a part of Coil, but they were not of the ilk of the ones that had come before. You know, they were proper sit in your boots musicians. They knew what they were doing. Do you know what I mean? They knew what they were doing, and that was getting more. And that, I think, if Jeff hadn't died, the next album might have featured that a lot more. You know, that he was getting that kind of Celtic, you know, old historic Anglo-Saxon music vibe thing. You know,
that would have been really interesting.
They were really nice players. Yeah, they make some nice sounds. You know, like Remote Viewer, some lovely sounds made from one instrument. You know, as opposed to. And just played live, you know, it's beautiful. It would have been lovely to get those sort of guys into a studio and just let them free, and then take some bits off it, you know, let them just go for it, lads, and then take some bits. We never really had that opportunity, except Remote Viewer, which, you know, was like jams and stuff. But I can't speak for them. I don't think I ever spoke to them. You know, I just listened to the recordings of them, and when they were live again, I dealt with Pete. I didn't deal with them, you know. But certainly they were a part of Coil. They were, anybody that saw Coil live, they were a big part of it. So who knows? Maybe it would have gone that way. Real musicians would have started to be involved. You know, you never know. It might have ended up with a real drummer and some string players, and who knows? But no, first it was us, anarchic dabblers. First we were anarchic dabblers, and then I think TPS was possibly the first, what you would call, that's Thighpaulsandra, was possibly the first musician that got involved. You know, the rest of us, we were dabblers. In terms of musicianship, and then suddenly there was Tom, and God, for the life of me, I can't remember the other guy's name, but the playing the old English instruments. Now it was getting some real musicians in. So where it would have gone, who knows? But unfortunately, Jeff left us, and the whole thing stopped. You know, but certainly it was going that way. I think the appreciation of real players, maybe that's a live thing. Maybe when they were playing live, they realized having real players there is a positive thing, because they can sense the crowd and they can up the ante a bit, or slow it down and soften the tone, or scream the tone loud. You know, there's that performance element to it, as opposed to the studio made albums. And who knows, there might have eventually been a Coil live album if it continued that way. But unfortunately, Jeff died, and you know, the whole thing collapsed. But so that's my stories on those. I don't have any real stories, except Drew was a really nice guy. I like Steve, but there was something dark going on there, which I'm sure he knows more about than I do. But there was something dark. Well, I think it's been, other people have spoken of it, so I won't. But he was there, and then he was gone. But maybe that's what really drummed home to me, that Pete and Jeff were Coil. Nobody else really mattered. If I had to talk Coil, I'm talking to them, which for me meant talking to Pete, because we were closer, you know. But yeah, Yeah, no, sorry, no revolutionary insights there, I'm afraid. He was a nice guy. He was dark. That's about it. That's about it. It's going back a long time, you've got to remember as well. So we're going back with Steve, we're going back 30 years. So it's quite a long time. There's been quite a lot of water under the bridge since then to try and remember, you know. But I think I've got to you as a feeling of how it was to work with Pete, which was the real thing, you know. I think it was John's vision and Pete's allowing everyone to be free, which is what made them what they were, you know. Separate them up and they would have been obviously different things. But the rest of us were part players. How much importance we part, who knows? But without them guiding the thing, you know, nothing would have happened. Plus, obviously, someone has to pay for the studio time. Getting back to basics, basics. But I think, yeah, it was a wonderful time. I tell you, not a day goes by when Pete doesn't enter my mind at least once. And I have a son now in Thailand. Again, thanks to going out there and working with Pete. I have a son out in Thailand, which I speak to regularly, and I go and see. So I'm always thinking of the son, and Pete always comes in at the same time. So not a day goes by where I don't think of Peter at least once a day. You know, I was in tears when I heard he died. I was an absolute mess, you know, for a while, because it was such an important influence on me. So you know, that's all I can say really. Yeah, which is very unusual because, you know, you work with clients and some you get close to, some you don't. You know, but I think Pete had a magic that you couldn't help but like him. Just a genuinely nice human being.
Incredible. Yeah, well, thank you.
Well, it's good. Yeah, it's nice. It's nice. He wasn't a dark sort of Aleister Crowley. Everybody hated his guts and he'd blackmailing you into doing the tunes. Maybe that would have made a more interesting story, but unfortunately he was a really, really nice bloke and it was lovely working for them.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that I think that's a whole another can of worms, right? The more thematic side of Coil, and I imagine that working so closely with them, you probably had some insights about how much that influenced, even if it was a very instinctive process coming up with the sounds. I imagine that the more those things that Pete was into, the more occult or pagan influences probably found their way in somehow, even in the artwork or the song title.
Oh yeah. I've been to their house many times when they lived in London. I've been to their house many times, and I guess you could call it dark. I think if somebody, you know, think of the beginning of the film Seven, and you could consider when you walk through the front door into Pete's house, you'd be entering like that. But you know, because they were so nice, you didn't get scared by it, you know. But yeah, there were some interesting objects around. Let's put it that way. Some interesting collections of objects. I don't think they got exported to Thailand. I don't think they're the sort of things that you could import into your country. There's some very interesting objects, and that's all I would say.
All right.
That's not a sexual thing. I just want to point that out. It's not like some crazy sexual thing. It's more the cult. It's more of an occult type thing, more of a black magic type thing. But I think that was more Jeff. You know, Pete was so rounded. He was such a rounded human being that I think he took all sides of life. It could be the light. It could be Disney. It could be Disney one side. It could be Aleister Crowley the other side. He saw a bigger picture in life. You know, he didn't see a small narrow frame of life. He saw the a big canvas of life. You know, that's all I can say. You know.
Well, and that's also reflected in Coil, right? With the variety in sounds and even in moods. I think I would say that Coil is both the Disney and the Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the Bon Tempi tune on Love's Secret Domain, you know, I can't remember the name of the tune. It's funny. I hadn't heard the album for so many years, But there's a tune where Pete had got a little new Casio toy, you know, a little Casio keyboard, and his little preset was the cheesiest little sort of like a sort of pseudo samba type thing, and he loved it. We're going to use this now. If you'd said that to a lot of Coil fans, that's not Coil, you know, if they didn't realize Pete had made that decision, there would have been an absolute revolution amongst them. You know, you can't do that, but you know, that's how free it was. That's how free it was. It could be, you know, the cheesiest thing in the world, or it could be something quite deep. I don't think I got the intelligence or the experience yet to listen to John's lyrics and try and understand them. He was obviously super smart. And I, you know, to me, it was, let's just make music. I didn't look into it too deep. Maybe now I'm older, I'll re-review where he was coming from and try and understand what I think he was coming from. As you know, Mr. Sam, as a drummer, when you're doing the session, you're just doing the session. You know,
pretty much, yeah. I know.
You don't have time to think of the singer's motivation for this or the bass player's motivation for that. You just want to do the best you can. And
oh yeah, absolutely.
and then afterwards, get time to reflect on it. Yeah. But it's Raphael. The problem is it's sadness. I missed both of them, but obviously particularly Peter, because I was closer with Pete. So it's kind of sad. Sometimes I bumble on a video on YouTube, and someone's put up a video for one of the songs, and I get really sad. You know, it's kind of like, it's almost like you can't go back and listen too much, because it's you know, you want to keep that boxed. You know, it's like almost like losing a relative or something. You know, we were that close. That much of my life was spent with them. But it's, you know, but at some point before I snuff it, I don't know how many years we got left, but at some point before we snuff it, I think I'll give it a real good reflection from beginning to end. I'll listen to it, and I'll certainly get to watch Blue. I don't know if I will today now, because we've done a few hours on this, but next week or so I will dig Blue out and I will watch it from beginning to end.
It would be interesting as a retrospect for yourself, because obviously, you know, you were there, you witnessed it, it was a thing, and obviously, you know, you left it. You as many things you've done, you've created something, you moved on, and you've seen people come and go. And Derek Jarman, a lot like your friend Pete, he died too young. Who knows what they could have achieved? And obviously, when you come back and you think this through and you watch it again, I'd be very curious to see if you get anything from it. Maybe nothing, or maybe you'll be like me and you'll just lean forward suddenly, and you'll become mesmerized by it.
Well, I hope so, but I'm still worried that, being a little bit of an egotistical fucker, I might just be waiting for the bit that we did to see how that fits in. You know, once that bit's passed, then I'll be able to concentrate on the rest of it. You know, it might end up being one of those. You know. Yeah. I hope not. Maybe now.
Is there a particular piece of work that you did that you think about more than the others?
With Coil?
With anything.
Oh yeah, Electric Sirrogha 2. I think it's my favorite thing I've ever done. Yeah, Electric Sirrogha 2.
Why?
Pieces 1 and 4. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I just really love it.
It wasn't just that there was just this idea that was just magical. It was just, there's just something about this particular piece.
Why? Do you know, the funny thing was, I'd spent a year building a studio. Okay, I finally got my kids away from a really rough town. By now, I had 4 of the little buggers, and I had a wife, and we managed to get somewhere where we had an outbuilding. And I spent a year, because I couldn't afford builders, I spent a year learning the skills and jigsawing and everything. And I made a studio in this room, and I finally had a home studio I was proud of. And guess what? As often happens, the wife decides you're surplus to requirements for whatever reason. So I suddenly realized I was going to lose the wife, the kids, and the studio. And Electric Sirrogha 2 was written at that time. The first 4 songs that are on that were written in a really short period of time when I knew I was about to lose what I thought at the time was everything. And maybe that's in there. Maybe that's why when I listen now, it has power on me. Maybe because of the time it was written, or maybe because of what was going on at the time it was written. I was putting more into it that I didn't realize. I don't know, but I just particularly like it, and I still like it.
Yeah.
It didn't get released till, I don't know, 8 years after that particular event. You know, when I finally went back to listen to it, I said, you know what? I still fucking love this, and I'm going to put this out. but it was written at a very strange time. Yeah,
those emotional connections are very important. Like I think personally, you know, there's a lot of things that I've worked on that never saw fruition, and that's the real problem with films. They just take so long, and especially when you don't have access to the money easily. So many projects that I worked on, so many things that I put a lot of myself into never got to see fruition. And every so often I find a script that I worked on for years and I would just read it. And obviously I see a lot of holes in the game or whatever, a lot of things that I've certainly improved with time, but the fundamental, that emotional connection, it's very hard to replicate. And because each piece of work for me is very different, I'm usually trying to express a different thing, and that's how I work. I can't do anything if I haven't got or I can't create anything. Let me just be exact here. I can't create anything until I have something that I want to express, and that's why sometimes there's a lot of time between projects for me, because I just can't. I feel like in a flunk, and I can't seem to put. I'm one of those people who puts out a lot of output. I'm not very good at putting out output. It's one of the reasons why I've had to like try and branch out into other things, because time can go by and bang, a few years have gone by, you haven't done anything for a while. And so when I put something and I put everything, even the kitchen sink, into it, and you know, you almost have to endure a lot of stuff to be able to even get something there on the page for me. And then when I finally do put it together and it comes out into something, whether even if it's only a sketch of what it is, a lot of time and effort goes into it, because I sort of have to keep analyzing. I came back, I studied film in university, and I did ancient civilizations in school before that. So analyzing is something that I do a lot. I spend a lot of time fixated on things. It's not very healthy. It makes you a little bit weird, but it's even with my environmental work, I fixate on patterns. I'm always looking for patterns of behavior and patterns in emotion, and trying to. I mean, I've always maintained that when I work, I'm telling my own story through the voices of others. And even though that sounds somewhat narcissistic, it's not, because you try to write what you know, and you try and create expressions of your own emotional failures or successes, and you try and create something that other people can understand throughout that. And that's how that's why it's so difficult for me, because I have to layer so many things that I'm feeling and going through over periods of time, and by the end it's unrecognizable. It's like some sort of Frankenstein baby. And that's where I started the conversation with you by, that's how I start to put things together. And it's a lot like sort of like a Tetris gameplay there, putting pictures and letters. And that's why, you know, whether it's a book or whether it's film or just even videos and things like that, it takes a lot. And I think there are those connections with certain pieces of work that almost they're haunting. You know what I mean?
Do you know what? Just listening to you, I do not envy trying to make a film. When I think about the complexities of trying to make a film as opposed to making a tune where you can do most of the parts yourself because you have no choice, it just seems to me like the complexity of making a film is just too extreme. There's so many moving parts. There's so many parts.
And you didn't even get to the part of the other people. Randall, just so far you have been just talking about your part, the conceiving the movie. So if we get into the whole all of the other aspects, it's even more nightmarish, I imagine.
Absolutely, because you have to be a salesman, you have to be a director, you have to be a producer, you got to be a writer, then you navigate trying to get it somewhere, and then of course then you have to also do all the social stuff, which I hate. I'd much rather be in a dark room with the lights off, if you ask me. That is where I'm happy. You know, I'm. It's the bit of film that doesn't appeal to me is that side of it, because I mean this is where I am jealous of musicians, because if I could do music, I would love to just be able to sit there and be a one-man band. I noticed there's a Burzum poster in Sam's Sam's room there. I would get a microphone, the shittiest one possible. I would make really abrasive sounds in this dark room that I'm in. Because for me, there's no, because part of the problem with my job is I have to communicate so much, and communication can be exhausting. And especially when you're trying to create and you have to communicate and have all the answers all the time, because you can never not have the answer, because otherwise everybody thinks they can do your job better than you. And everybody always wants your job. And it's always tricky because you have to know every answer to every question. The actor is going to ask you, you can't have any doubts. The moment you have a doubt, they're going to have a doubt in you. So even if you have to lie, you have to have absolutely all the answers. So it can be very difficult in that respect, because sometimes, and I don't know if you guys are like this, but the emotional turmoil of creation, and nothing goes to plan, ever. Nothing ever goes to plan. It's an absolute disaster. It's chaos. But somehow the chaos creates things.
But you've got the added layer of all those extra people, yeah.
Well, let's just say if the fires burn you, you have a crowd. It's like Guy Fawkes night every night.
Right, so I think we went through some very, very important, very interesting topics, and I'm very glad that we've got this insider information from a band, from Danny, about the band as incredible as Coil and the people involved in it. So yeah, I'm just going to ask anyone if there's any final remarks anyone wants to say, or any final questions.
Not from me.
Well, I would like to just say something, since nobody's going to say anything. I would just say, like, Sam, Danny, Raphael, I mean, it's very interesting because we all come from very different walks of life, and we more or less different ages, but we've all kind of, I think, come together with one understanding that there is an appreciation for something that happened in music. And Danny, you were very much, a cornerstone of that. And whether you realize it or not, I feel personally that you've had a massive influence on my career anyway, and my creative energies, because much of the things which you were probably just tweaking and playing had a profound effect in my creative world, which led to a lot of the things that I create today. And, I have a lot of the records are being re-released now, and, it's a wonderful thing that a lot of those creations are somewhat timeless. And I know for someone who's probably done as much as you've done, those things are just, you were another day at the office. But it's actually a very interesting thing for me to meet somebody who had that and was there and created something. And also to be able to share this understanding of where a lot of these things originated and how they came to be. It was very insightful for me. And for me personally, I'm going to watch Blue again, and I'm going to flip a few more Coil records. But even some of the other stuff that you've done as well, like, we talked a lot about Coil, but we didn't talk about some of your other projects as much. And maybe there'll be a part 2 of this, and we can talk a bit more of those. It's very inspiring, what I heard from you today, and thank you for your musical contribution.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're going to have to, via Raphael, send me some links to some of your stuff so I can poach some of your images for my
anytime you want.
Because I'd like to explore what Sam's been up to, what Randal's been up to. Because I'm at the age now where as I told you, I was up yesterday at a memorial. People are disappearing from me all over the place, so I don't get recommendations. And my young son in Thailand listens to music which I personally cannot listen to. And my kids in England are old enough that, you know, they've got their own little things, so they're not recommending things. And I miss the thing of when you were younger, you had friends everywhere recommending you things, you know, like, why don't you give this a little? So I miss that, you know. I have to kind of bumble my own way into finding this stuff. And the algorithm of YouTube is just going to show me Rita Ora or whatever. It's not going to take me somewhere where someone's only got 400 views. You know, I have to find that myself. So any recommendations anybody's got, or even for their own channels, that'd be great, because that would take me on a different trip, and maybe I can reset the algorithm, you see, and it will send me off to other things that are kind of in that ilk, if you see what I mean. So yeah.
Okay, so that's it. Thanks everyone for being here. Danny, thank you so much again for sharing so much of the what Coil has been and all these fantastic experiences.
Thank you very much.
Randal, thank you for being here again. I think your output has also been very interesting.
Anytime. Love coming here.
And same thing with you, Sam. Thank you a lot for being here as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. It was really enlightening to get a lot of finally here, because I never heard too many, and a lot of what Coil was like behind the scenes for me was always kind of a mystery, and it's been really illuminating getting to hear some like firsthand stories.